pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So the first item always on our agenda is public audience. We have a large audience here tonight. I don't know if anybody would like to speak. If you do, please raise your hand and we'll call on you. Susan, please state your name and your address and try to limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Okay.
And to the items that are on the agenda for this evening.
Okay.
Please.
Susan Messino, 41 Madison Lane. I sent some written comments, so...
and we've all received them.
Okay, perfect. And I just, related to that, I scribbled on this piece of paper. I just wanted to, emphasize, some of my comments are basically like, first do no harm comments. You don't have to do anything. You should really think about what are unintended consequences of any changes that you make. I really want to encourage you to use this process as a role model for giving people a lot of public notice about, because I think that the charter is going to be on the vote in November is the goal. No? Don't we have to vote on it?
We have to first go to public hearing and then we have to present a draft to the Board of Selectmen, and there's a whole process.
Oh, so it might not be in November, or it might. Okay, well, if it is in November,
may or may not be.
Okay, I was thinking. I know this isn't a back and forth, but I was thinking if it is in November, I know you guys are working hard that we should do backwards math to make sure that we can properly notice it and all that kind of stuff ahead of time. So that may be an irrelevant comment. And then the other comment that I wanted to make, I know there were some comments about, Simsbury being a difficult town to develop and all of that. And I've really been hearing those comments ever since I moved to town 20 years ago. And I think that the difficulty that people perceive are because we have high standards, we ask questions, we try and evaluate things. And I don't think we've had a lot of development come in. So I don't think that making changes to make things necessarily more efficient is always a good idea. So I just hear a lot of comments about efficiency and difficulty and all that, and I want to emphasize that efficiency is good for like rote tasks, but not for things that need kind of integrative thinking. People look kind of confused, but I don't know, I'll just stop there. And then my other point that I wanted to make is I wanted to follow up on coming on behalf of Open Space last time, and Helen was saying that we wanted to talk about some things, and I managed to sort of piece it together that she's talking about a kind of thread that we've been talking about due diligence, which I think someone asked about that. Is it about due diligence? But yes, it is about due diligence, and we're having a meeting tomorrow, and we'll talk about some other minor edits, and I don't think we need to come before you again, but I'm expecting that we will send you another tiny edit on behalf of the Open Space Committee, and that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Lisa?
Pass this out. I brought copies.
Okay. Just state your name and your address.
Lisa Hefner. I live at 21 Aspenwood. I'm currently the chair of the Board of Finance, a former first selectman and a former selectman, but I'm here tonight in my personal capacity. As you know, I've come before you twice before, once in my personal capacity, once in my official capacity, and tonight I am here again in my personal capacity. So this has not been reviewed by the Board of Finance as a whole. When I came before you as Board Finance Chair, I talked about the critical importance of transparency, access to information, resources, and process, and to build on what Susan was saying about the importance of process and what is due to the community. Process is really important for consensus building and to making sure that we're communicating what we're doing. Efficiency is great for minor tasks like how do you fill out this form? Can I access it early? But if you care about consensus building process, I think is a critical thing. What I've done is put together 6 additional questions that I think the Charter Revision Commission should consider or evaluate. They are building on some of the things I've said in the past. I did include legal references so that you would have it easily at your fingertips to incorporate some of the stuff that the Board of Ed is required to do by law to expand that to the Board of Selectmen. And that's what I've got. I also emailed it to Franklin, but I got it to him late, so I brought hard copies.
Thank you very much. And Franklin will add this to the website as part of our public comments section as well.
Of course.
Look, yeah, I'm looking over here. I'm not going on yet.
I didn't plan to, but I just thought I would say that because of the agenda. Wendy Maxida, 16 Hunting Ridge Drive. I just wanted to comment on the, I know you're discussing the charter and the Board of Selectmen, First Selectman, Town Manager, but one of the things that we did put forward in our proposal or our recommendations was we are basically a council manager form of government today. That is what we follow. We don't use the moniker that most towns use, because they remained and kept the First Selectman and Board of Selectmen. But I strongly feel, and I know you'll be discussing that if we continue with this form of government, to move to the real council manager form of government, which is the standard of that form of government, and that includes the naming as the chief elected official is usually a mayor, and then the council members. Just because as a First Selectman, it's very confusing being called a First Selectman and being pretty much one of the only First Selectman non-chief executive officers in the state of Connecticut. So I'm continually looped in as the chief executive officer on multiple things, because most First Selectmen are the chief executive officer. So that's just something to either explore, to do homework on and research as you look into some of the things that we put forward.
Thank you. Steve or Jackie, do you have any? No? Okay.
You want me to talk about pizza?
Pepperoni? You didn't bring it, so you can't talk about it.
Sorry. Point of order. Only items on the agenda.
Maybe it should be. Could I amend the agenda?
Yes. Yes. Okay, well, thank you very much. Seeing as that we have no additional public audience, we're going to move to the next item on our agenda, which is the discussion that we're going to have this evening. So this is our opportunity. Franklin has compiled all of the information that we've received in writing. He has copied the sections of the charter that we're going to be starting to review today. I don't expect that we're going to get through all of this. Paul, in his absence, has submitted his comments to us so he can be part of the discussion. And so, having never done this before, we're just going to start. So, I think that a good place to start is the conversation about our form of government, and if what is written in the charter is what we're hearing from the public and people who have submitted comments want to continue seeing, or do we need to make a change, and if that what that change is, what's the wording of it, and what's the form that we're looking for. So I'll start by saying I don't think we've heard from really very many people that we need to go back to the previous form of government where we were just First Selectmen and didn't have a town manager. I think there's been enough comments that this seems to be working. We just have to fine tune what we have, whether it's the title and responsibilities and reporting. So I don't know if anybody else has any comments regarding that.
I have some thoughts, because I agree. I think the consensus seems to be we just need to fine tune this relationship. So I took a look at the state statutes, as you know, Chris.
Yes, and is Bob on the?
Yes. Bob, can you hear us? I saw you go unmute, but we can't hear anything if you're...
There he is. We can't hear you.
Try again. I just changed the way the audio is coming in. Try again, Bob. Say something.
How about now?
Yeah. Sure. Can you guys hear him?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, well, Bob can correct me when I go astray, but the first, fortunately, Lisa's provided us with copies of the relevant statutes. So if you look at page 3 of her statement, at the bottom of that page is section 7-193A2. One of the things we've been discussing since we started is this question of do we have a chief executive officer or a chief administrative officer. And what I discovered looking at the statute is that the nomenclature is really of no importance at all, because the statute provides that the municipality shall have a chief executive officer who may be one of the following, and there are several alternatives, and two of them involve a chief administrative officer, meaning that a chief administrative officer and a chief executive officer can be the same person. So simply designating the town manager as an executive officer or an administrative officer, in my mind, won't clarify anything. The same statute says the powers, duties, and term of office of the chief executive officer shall be those prescribed by the general statutes. I asked Bob about this. As far as I can tell, the general statutes don't tell us what the powers and duties shall be. So I think we're pretty much on our own as far as that is concerned. But there's a separate set of statutes in Chapter 96 which have some quite particular provisions about the town manager, which are not in our charter and which, among other things, prescribe much more of a role for the Board of Finance. My understanding, and Bob will correct me, is that we are not bound by Chapter 96 because our charter and our provisions are adopted under the home law provisions of a different chapter. But I think we should consider, and I think that's one of Lisa's suggestions, we should consider whether these are terms that we want to consider in helping to define and clarify the role of the town manager. So the only other point I'd make beyond throwing that out as a topic for discussion on this, whether we want to be guided by the state statutes concerning the role of the town manager, is that I think we're all in agreement that the town manager should operate under the supervision of the Board of Selectmen, and it's up to the Board of Selectmen to determine exactly how much or how little leeway they want to grant a particular town manager. But I think we can facilitate the way in which, or the reporting structure, so that to make it easier for the Board of Selectmen to exercise its supervisory authority. And personally, I think that should be by clarifying the role of the first selectman as a point of contact with the town manager, but I'm open to any other suggestions we've got.
Yeah, just to be clear, when a town or city adopts a charter under Chapter 99, it's governed by its charter, and Chapter 96 is really for those towns who operate under the general statutes without a charter. So if you look at 7-193B, it says this is part of the Home Rule Act, every municipality shall have all municipal officers, departments, boards, commissions, and agencies which are required by the general statutes or by the charter. Each municipality may have any municipal officers, departments, boards, and commissions specifically allowed by the general statutes or are necessary to carry out the municipal powers, duties, and responsibilities. All such officers shall be elected, appointed, or organized in the manner provided by the general statutes, except as otherwise provided by the charter or by ordinance or resolutions adopted pursuant to the charter. And this gets back to the topic we talked about early on of preemption. And in Connecticut, which is a constitutional Home Rule Act state, the charter preempts the statutes on the same subject for those areas that are purely local concern. And what I can do is work with Franklin on this. I'll pull together the 4 or 5 Connecticut Supreme Court cases which really articulate this principle. So charters preempt statutes on the same topic for matters of purely local concern.
statutes preempt the charters on topics of statewide concern. So, in the case of the Wyndham case, I believe it was Wyndham versus Wyndham Board of Finance. The Connecticut Supreme Court rendered an opinion which cuts across all of this. It basically said, if it's a matter of how you run your town, it's a matter of local concern. If it's a matter that the state statutes have shown an intent to occupy the field, such as zoning or Freedom of Information Act, then the state statutes preempt the charter. So that's simply to say it's really up to the town to define the roles and responsibilities of its chief elected officer and its chief executive officer. The town may, but is not required, to have a town manager have the duties as defined in Chapter 96, which there's a statutory section on town managers. But you do that through adopting it within your charter. It's not required simply because it's in the statute, because when you adopt a charter, you fall out of 96, Chapter 96, and you fall under Chapter 99, if that's clear.
I think so. Thank you for that clarification. So,
But I think reading the case that started all this is the case called Caulfield versus Noble, which really put meat on the bones of the Home Rule Act in Connecticut, and I'll share that with the commission for its next meeting. And there's a few others that sort of elaborate on that.
So I think really if we look at the high level thing first of the words that we use for the roles. Okay. It may not, and we're hearing a lot about council, mayor, to define the roles a little bit better for the public so they understand who does what. It might not change the roles, how it's written in the charter that much, but it may provide clarity. And is that something we want to discuss about changing? I know we have a historical, need to hold on to things around here sometimes, but, have we evolved to the point where we need to become a mayor and a town council with a town manager because we've gotten larger and more complex as we've grown?
I think that what we really should be focused on right now is clarifying the roles, and what the labels are can come later, because this is a form of management that we've tried for 7 years, and we now know more about it. And so I think the question is, what can we put in the charter to have clarity on what these roles are, and then decide what we want to name it. Because if you think about the general public as such, they don't really care what it's called. Because it's always been called selectmen. We'll go a select person. Maybe that's not relevant to them. What's probably more relevant is to those of us who are part of this entire process to make sure that there's clarity on what's in the charter, just so that all the other boards know who to call and what to do and what to say when they are doing their duties. So I would say we go into the substantive wording of the duties and start clarifying that based on the information we've gathered over the last 2 months.
So when you did the charter revision last time, did you go section by section?
Yeah.
So we just start with one section and move on to the other and make those?
Yeah.
And did we vote on each, did you vote on each section so we had a consensus from all the commissioners?
Yeah.
About what those changes were before we redlined it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Where it was more formal, just if anybody has any issues, since you're going to vote on the whole thing at the end anyways.
Right.
It
We
was
don't need to
more
vote
of a,
every time.
Hey, is there anybody have a problem with this, and that kind of stuff. What I would say is I think we've heard a lot about clarifying roles too. My only concern is being overly prescriptive, right? Because if something changes, then you got to change a charter again, right? So we have to thread that needle of providing them the flexibility without tying their hands too much. Right now, they've got the power to set those duties with the town manager. Now, they may or may not be using it, but the power is there today. So I echo what Bert's saying. You know, if we wanna clarify some certain things, that's, you know, I'm support. But again, I don't think we need to be putting down, here are the 15 responsibilities for the town manager. Here's the 15 for Board of Selectmen. I think we'll drive ourselves crazy by trying to do that, to be honest with you. And again, it ties their hands, which you don't want to do.
Yeah, or unties their hands, which you also don't want to do.
I would agree with that. Like I said, don't be so prescriptive that
Right.
people else can't change it. But should we have a procedure in there on how they could do that? So there's.
And since this is the topic that's most discussed, perhaps we should look into part 4 and start there first, because that seems to be the long pole in the tent. And once we do that, we'll get clarity on the other parts of the charter.
What I would like to suggest, I mean, I think we're going to have to do that, but before we do that, I'll start, but I think we should reach some kind of consensus about what are the issues we want to clarify, what do we want to accomplish by changing the language that we see, and I'll tell you my concerns, for example. One is the one we've talked about several times in these meetings, which is that the elected boards should receive all the information they need to do their jobs in a timely fashion. And as an example of where I have that concern, when the town manager testified here, or spoke here, I should say, he dutifully recited his understanding that he was subject to the supervision of the Board of Selectmen, but he mentioned a kind of exception for labor negotiations, and said, in that case, if I'm, quote, remembering correctly, he said, I like to present them with a fait accompli. And he explained that what he had in mind was that labor negotiations involve a lot of give and take, and he said the members of the board or the supervisory people like to object to one point or another, not realizing that other things depend on it. To me, that says that the person who presents the fait accompli is setting the priorities of the negotiations, and that should be the job of the Board of Selectmen. And so that's the kind of thing I'd like to clarify. But also, in other words, there shouldn't be the possibility, we shouldn't leave open any possibility in the charter for the town manager or for other members of the town staff to withhold information as a way of keeping control over decision-making. And also, during that exchange, Mark mentioned he didn't want to be in a system where the town manager could be hired and fired by a single member of the Board of Selectmen. I think that's right. I think there's a power for the whole board. But he didn't really react to my suggestion, which has been brewing in my mind ever since, that we designate the first select person as the point of contact with the town manager, such that every member of the Board of Selectmen has equal opportunity to talk with the town manager, to consult with him, to offer advice, but there won't be a situation in which the town manager fulfills his obligation or her obligation to report to the Board of Selectmen without sharing that information with the first selectman, so that the town manager can't, for example, speak to one member of the board off the record and then say, I have discharged my obligation. This way, there's one person responsible for gathering all the information from the town manager and sharing it with the rest of the Board of Selectmen. And those are the two areas I think we should build into the charter.
Yeah, I agree on those.
Well, we did hear a lot about transparency, collaboration. That came from the public, it came from selectmen. It
Came from a lot of places.
and that was a theme. With a lot of
And I know titles are like, well, how are we gonna term this mayor, first selectman, whatever. But I know there needs to be more clarification because I think there's different interpretations of chief executor, chief administrator. I think people have a different definitions of those. And I think you writing the recommendation, maybe we need to have, what is this defined as? Because if you come up from another town, city, state, whatever, and they were a town manager, but they were also the chief executive officer, and we don't want that. We have to be much clearer, I think, of what is the role of town manager, what is the role of first select person, mayor, first council, whatever we decide on that. I think what those titles are important when we have the right definition. So again, let's say, first selectman, mayor, whatever, that's important too, but I think it's even more important to make sure the definitions of those roles are defined more clearly in the charter.
And I think there's a way to strike a balance between what everybody's saying, that it's not an itemization of literal tasks,
Yes.
but a description of types of tasks or
And then you can have a catch-all.
Sorry, go ahead.
And then you have a catch-all at the end that says in the event there is a lack of clarity, it should go to the elected representatives.
Yeah.
And so, and it goes back to the Board of Selectmen.
I don't know if we need to overthink it. I mean, like, just in 402, you could say the first selectman is the chief executive officer. I mean, it could be something as simple as that.
Well, because I think it says somewhere there's one sentence in town manager that says both, so that's where you go.
No, I agree with you, but I don't,
No.
I'm not sure we need to.
And then if we say chief executive officer, it needs to go in defined terms, because imagine you've never seen this kind of government before and you're looking at it for the first time. You should have clarity as to what the chief executive officer is. I
Point
think.
of information, that would be going back to the prior form of government. Bob, if I'm correct, if the first selectman, which would be the chief elected official, is the chief executive officer, wouldn't that be the prior form of government? Because isn't
But
Yeah,
Bob,
that
how
wasn't
do
my
we
intention,
decide?
but I appreciate you saying that.
Okay.
I have a question for Bob. Now, in terms of chief executive officer, if it goes back to the previous government, the form of government, how are we coming to that conclusion? Is it based on something that's in the general statutes, or is it because it's not in the charter?
I think it is from the statutes, again, looking at 7193, because it says the municipality shall have a chief executive officer, and then it gives us several
They can be.
options. And one is the first selectman, and the other is another is a town manager. And so that's why I think we should focus less on the nomenclature
Right.
and more on defining the roles.
Yes.
One concrete suggestion I was gonna make later, in section 502B, we say the town manager shall be responsible to the Board of Selectmen. I would change that to say something like, shall be subject to the direction of the Board of Selectmen. Make it clear that this is in the nature of a direct report, and that the Board of Selectmen is ultimately the decision maker and driving the bus.
Where is this, Bob?
502B.
Oh,
And maybe it's a mute point, I don't know. Would it be actually better to, I know we have like this order of what we like to do tonight, but it would be almost better to clarify the town manager clearer? And that would almost clarify the Board of Selectmen
Yeah, I
better?
think so.
yes, I agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in section 501, in the second paragraph, it states the town manager shall be responsible to the Board of Selectmen for carrying out all acts and policies of the Board of Selectmen and the resolutions and ordinances adopted by the town, and shall be responsible for the administration of the town consistent with the policies established by the Board of Selectmen. So do we need to say
It's
that
here,
again?
yeah.
It's right there.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same language as in 502B, it's being responsible to the board, but again, a CEO, a COO is responsible to a board of directors that has more or less leeway. We might want to leave it at that, or we might want to make it clear in the charter that ultimately the Board of Selectmen has a role in determining how its policies are carried out.
Can we go over 502 and just make sure that we get through from A to E and then
I shouldn't say yes, it's up to the chair.
No, it's not up to me.
Actually,
I'm a democracy here.
No, this is matters. Could we go through 502 and the duties of town manager, so that's a defined term, so maybe as we're doing this, we can also compile the list of defined terms. And so town manager would be a defined term, shall be defined in a position description, which is also a defined term, to be approved from time to time by the Board of Selectmen, which is a defined term. So those three go into defined terms. Those duties shall include at least the following, which is, I really like that language because it's got include and at least.
Commissioner Shivaswamy, I remember at one meeting, you did mention the importance of having like a glossary or a spot where all these terms are defined. So when you say defined terms, I actually, at the direction of Town Attorney DiCrescenzo, made a Word doc, and I was going to use this to redline and add blue. So at the very end, we're thinking, just so I can at least populate it, and whatever I come up with, I bring back to the commission and you can all review. But I'm gonna start this glossary or this type of definition of terms, and you just listed three. Can I ask you to just repeat those three? Was it?
Sure.
I remember you said position description. Was town manager one of them?
So it's so section 502A. Town manager is a defined term. Position description is a defined term. Board of Selectmen. So far.
Unless we change those names.
Could I ask?
Unless we decide not to put them in defined terms, but the way it's
Has the-
written, it looks like a defined term.
Sorry, has the Board of Selectmen adopted a position description for the town manager?
It would be the job, there was.
There was a rubric.
There was a job description.
There's a job description that they adopted.
That was approved by the Board of Selectmen, I can get you the exact date, but there is a job description in addition to the packet that we did for the executive search, which listed
And-
everything.
In one of our early meetings, we had asked the question if the charter was consistent with the job description that was posted in the rubric that he was being measured on, and they went back and added some items. Am I correcting myself? Am I stating that correctly? I'm looking at the two selectmen right here. Because there was things that were in the charter that needed to be added to his job description because it was prescribed in the charter.
Just to be
That's
clear,
your-
we should have
that's
those
your that's your
position
definition.
description and job description, that you get to pick one, you shouldn't have it. The charter is position and then,
That's an excellent, is there a consensus at all for that word to describe would it be job description or position
I
description?
think position is.
I think position is better than job.
Yeah. Position
Sounds good.
description.
Sounds more
And
official.
I looked, the town of Simsbury town manager job description, its date is November 30th, 2017. Just November
Okay.
30th, 2017, assuming that it went through the Board of Selectmen approval process.
Now, it may be approved from time to time by the Board of Selectmen, which means where the charter gives the Board of Selectmen the power to expand or narrow the duties of the town manager, but are there any limits to that ability based on the contractual relationship with the town manager?
Well, the other
Well, let's look at the description.
The other
looking-
question.
I'm looking to
I'm
the
looking about,
screen
because,
here.
yeah, but the other question I would have is if they want to add items to the position description, they would have to do that via ordinance,
Right.
because it doesn't live in the charter. And then they would have to modify the job description or the position description at the same time, but also make sure that it's consistent with the contract.
Right. And also, they
Right?
could not eliminate duties that are mandatory under the charter.
Right.
Yeah.
But they could add to.
They could add by ordinance to the code.
Yeah, I think so.
Is that right, Bob?
It doesn't need to be an ordinance.
But they could add to the code.
And they probably,
Could we con-
common practice would be to do it by resolution. And the job description or position description has to include at least the 13 functions or duties spelled out in section 502A. But they, as was mentioned, that they could add to that so long as it's not a duty that is legally prescribed to some other function. Like they probably could not add to the position description that the town manager shall also be the town clerk or something. I suppose you could do that, but that would be an example of those duties are assigned somewhere else in the charter. But up to that point, I mean, they could prescribe that the town manager must attend every meeting of the Board of Selectmen. Not that we'd have to do that, but that's an example of something they could put in a position description, sort of assume that he or she would, but
That's number three.
there's a broad scope of what could be added to the position description.
So,
Should we just say
If we go
this-
back
it
to-
should be coordinated with the contract?
well, yeah, if we go back to A, do we have to, do we feel like we need to put, from time to time seems ambiguous,
As
but maybe that's good?
Standard,
No, it's-
standard language.
That's standard
that
language.
it's
Okay.
better, yeah.
But that the position description is, does it need to state that it needs to be consistent with the,
Well,
it's-
that would
with
be in
the
your-
contract? I mean, it seems kind of strange
The
that you
contract
have
should be in,
consistent with the charter.
Yeah.
but it sounds like it actually wasn't.
You know, I'm sure the contract has some language
Okay.
that's, you know,
And that would be
shall
the
be prescribed by the
defined,
Board of Selectmen.
that would be in the defined, in the definition of position description.
Right.
So,
I didn't want to hang us up on that, I just wondered if that would be a term limit in terms of, it may not be possible to change the job description while the contract's still in effect. But
Right.
certainly for the next one, how long is the contract?
Instead of just open time to time, should it say the minimum be ratified every 2 years? So the new board coming in at least looks at it and says, yeah, that's what we want, or it gives them the option to change it.
Well, but if we're gonna talk about term later, it might not be every 2 years, it could be every 4 if we
Well,
all
you're gonna be
agree.
changing
Yeah,
some of them, just,
right.
if you don't wanna go another 10 years before somebody goes, oh yeah, we haven't looked at that.
So I like time to time because it gives them the flexibility to, time to time could also be 6 months if we had like a snowstorm or something huge happening. It gives the elected representatives the flexibility to define, to redo this as needed.
As needed, yeah.
Yeah, as needed, so from time to time gives them more flexibility than.
Yeah, unless you wanted to put a minimum, just to ratify it every so often, so it's, at least it's looked at and it doesn't have to change.
We could do that we could put that in the position, we could put that in one of the.
Board of
Yeah,
Selectmen.
we could put that in the, in one of the, can we look at one and maybe that's where we can put it in, you know? So in one it says A1, 502A1, ensure all laws and ordinances governing the town are faithfully executed. So town is also a defined term, but I think we're all okay with the substantive
Yeah.
portion of it, right? Chair Barnett?
Yes, we don't want them to do anything.
Yes. Make periodic reports to the Board of Selectmen.
So this
Yeah.
question, because this has come up repeatedly in public comments, that periodic is
Too vague.
appears to be too vague. And that there should be regular reporting, and what does regular reporting mean?
As reasonably requested.
And it should not just be to the Board of Selectmen, it should also be to other elected boards that need information like the Board of Finance to make the decisions that they need to make. So I believe Lisa may have brought that up a couple of times. And I know Paul's comments
Yes, it was in
may,
Paul's.
may have included that as well. But I think we need to define too a little bit better about what periodic means and to which boards that reporting needs to happen.
I agree on both points, and I'm looking at Lisa's comments, which suggest that the town manager's responsibilities include providing such resources, analysis, staffing, and support to all elected boards and commissions as such boards and commissions require to fulfill their duties under state law and charter and to meet state mandated filing deadlines, which is
Well said.
pretty good.
Very good.
That's very specific though, and if things change and that's in the charter, are you gonna have a committee saying, hey, you owe this to me, and we're the ones that telling you what you have to provide us? Should that be in the job description, or the position description, that said this is what the Board of Selectmen wants you to do?
Is that too specific? I don't know. It's basically making clear that
Yeah, I'm just
the
thinking,
staff is supposed to give the boards what they need.
I know, but who's determining that? If you put it in the charter, I don't know.
I don't have any issue with the information. I just don't know if I don't know if 2 is where you're, because that 2 is just him giving his budget to the Board of Selectmen or whatever.
update.
Status,
Yeah.
right, exactly.
We don't
What you're talking about is much more like, as you well know, like the budget process and getting that information back and forth. Again, I don't know if that's 2. I'm not quite sure where the home is, but I don't know if it's 2.
14 applies to the Board of Finance.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of like what Paul made a suggestion of, is make bi-weekly or monthly, depends on what we decide, reports to the Board of Selectmen as outlined by the Board of Selectmen.
Yeah.
I mean, because that's who this position is reporting to.
Also, just off your
If we-
point, Commissioner Brett, there actually, you don't need to mention the word bi-weekly or monthly at all if you just say, as determined by the Board of Selectmen, leaving them to decide if it's bi-weekly
How often
or
they
want
monthly
it.
or
Right.
quarterly.
Right.
So again, that would actually follow at every organizational meeting. Maybe there would be a section where the Board of Selectmen discuss how often they want their reports, or at any time during the middle of the year, they could feel like it's infrequent. I can't imagine them thinking it's too frequent, and then they would want to change it that in. But if you wanted to say, make reports to the Board of Selectmen as determined, make reports to the Board of Selectmen as determined by the board, or something like that.
I think the word periodic is just too.
That's gotta go.
It's okay, but it has no definition.
Yeah,
There's no difference.
periodic is.
Defined by the board.
Yeah, it's got to be a little more.
So my suggestion is make periodic reports to the Board of Selectmen as reasonably outlined by Board of Selectmen.
Yes, I would take the word periodic out.
Yeah.
Bob, if the word reasonably is mentioned, could that give the town manager an opportunity to contest that, or is that word reasonably just a catch-all to, pretty much it won't change anything?
Well, if it's defined by the Board of Selectmen, then
Can we just say as
Yeah.
determined, or?
Instead of reasonable, just.
Yeah.
I'm just imagining a situation where the town manager thinks that
Right.
the situation is unreasonable, and
Absolutely.
what could come of that? I don't know, Bob, if I'm overthinking it.
No, you're not. You're not.
That's
You're not
why we're
overthinking.
here.
Yeah.
That's why it's-
We're overthinking every word.
Yeah, well.
So we're saying make reports to the Board of Selectmen as determined
By Board of
by the
Selectmen.
Board of
At
Selectmen.
frequency
At-
to be
at a frequency,
determined.
At a
Yeah.
frequency to be
Yeah.
determined by the Board
Yeah.
of
I
Selectmen,
think
yes.
that's.
So if there's consensus on that, I can add that in blue, and of course, anything I add, everybody will get a chance to.
No, that-
Yeah.
What is Bob's opinion on reasonable, the use of the word reasonable?
I thought we took it out.
Yeah, we
No,
Yeah.
but
She's
does he
just
think
curious.
that, I'm just curious, because Board of Selectmen could unreasonably request as well, by asking too many times.
Right, that's why we took
Gives
it
the
out.
Board of, this is the.
That's why we're taking it out.
Yeah, this,
No,
and
they
the
say
way it
weekly.
reads right now,
Right.
can
The
read the
manager
other
has to
way,
do weekly.
Oh,
Yeah.
it can
The
read
opposite
the other way,
like that.
as well. Because the
They
board-
could be unreasonable.
They could be unreasonable if we had, we don't have it, but we could have it.
But who would
Well, but
determine what's unreasonable?
What you're really building in there is,
A way
in
to-
a dispute between the town manager and the Board of Selectmen. Ultimately, it would be up to a court to decide if the board had acted reasonably. So I think we're putting in a sort of poison pill if we do that, if we don't give the discretion to the board.
Typically, you would give the discretion to the board to require periodic reports at a frequency to be determined by the board, and you could add in with consultation with the town manager.
Yeah.
So that
That's
the
a
town
nice
manager could say, every 3 days is not reasonable, or something like that. But I think the town manager report is a standing agenda item in every
Yeah.
board selectment meeting, isn't it?
correct,
Yes.
Bob, and just from my personal experience working in the capacity as management specialist, the town manager's report isn't as, let's say, as technical. It usually is used to describe more public-facing actions that the town manager has took, maybe not the nitty-gritty technical administrative day-to-day tasks. So maybe that report, the report as it currently exists, I don't think is a sufficient explanation of all the town manager has done since the last Board of Selectmen meeting. It's usually just a public-facing document, but that of course could change with the change in the charter.
But that's something we'd want to leave to the board also in terms of how detailed the
Yeah.
reports are that they want.
We don't wanna go report, it's crazy, and then it's all about reporting and not.
Well, do we need to add, in addition to the frequency determined by the Board of Selectmen, that that they determine the,
Well, I think it's more a question, again, you know, we're striking a balance and we don't want to micromanage, but here we're saying they've got a report and the frequency of the report is up to the Board of Selectmen. So there's going to be a report periodically. The board will decide how much. In terms of what they have to report, I like what we talked about before. In other words, that the town manager or the town staff as a whole has to report to the boards what they need or reasonably need in order to discharge their obligations in a timely manner.
which we
In other
haven't
words,
added anywhere
yeah,
yet.
we're gonna build at some point the requirement that if the Board of Education needs some data before it can make a decision, that nobody can hold it up until the last minute in order to tilt the playing field, something like that.
So, okay, so we're good with two? What are
I
you-
have
Can you read it?
make reports to the Board of Selectmen at a frequency to be determined by the Board of Selectmen. And did we want to add in consultation with the town manager, like town attorney?
We just take a second, hold on. I think we're getting, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
but
no,
we're getting, remember how take a step back and remember how this works. If those reports do not come at a frequency that satisfies the Board of Selectmen, he or she reports to the Board of Selectmen. So obviously this is taking it to the illogical extreme, but they can fire him. You know, that's the reporting relationship. So I don't know if we need to get caught up in the frequency, whether it's every week, every month, that at the end of the day, the Board of Selectmen is going to judge this person on these 13 or however it is and decide whether they're fulfilling those obligations or not. So again, I don't think we need to get caught up in a lot of this stuff, because you just got to remember how this flows.
Right, because the charter gives them the ability to make
Absolutely.
those decisions.
Yeah.
At any time.
Right.
And he reports to the Board of Selectmen at every meeting as
Right.
well, currently.
Right.
So is there any proposed change to?
I think we're good.
I would leave it
So I
alone.
think the simpler the language,
Yeah.
it's going to be a lot easier.
So no.
Less words.
I have a question on number 3 for the select people. So attend Board of Selectmen meetings with full right of participation in this discussion, but without a right to vote. Does the Board of Selectmen at any time want to meet without the town manager? Because this gives the town manager the right to sit in on your meetings.
You just have to go to executive committee.
Session, yeah.
Executive session.
And do I remember?
There is a
reading
section
that?
about executive session, I believe.
In the Board of Selectmen
In the Board of
section.
Selectmen section.
Is there one?
State statute outlines how and when you can go into executive session. It's pretty clear.
I'm sure that
Where
the
is
Board of
that?
Selectmen meets in the absence of the town manager when they're discussing his job performance and salary, for example,
Right.
in executive session.
Where is the executive session?
Well, it's in the Freedom of Information Act.
No, I mean in the charter. If it's there, that's good. If
Yeah.
it's not there,
State statute is very clear about when and
State
when.
statute, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's mentioned in section 402, which just alludes to it, all meetings of the selectmen for the transaction of business except executive sessions as defined in section, and then it says the Connecticut General Statute.
Yeah.
So it mentions that, but there is no,
Because it goes back to the
elaboration.
state statute.
Right, and there's, I think there's five, because it applies to us too, there's 5, I think, very clear reasons of when you can go into executive session.
Section
in
402.
that case, I would not do anything here, but we may want to clarify it. in part 4.
So does anybody have any changes to 3 that they want to make? No? Okay.
I think the point of 3 is that, whereas members of the public don't have the right to speak other than in public audience, the town manager can speak his piece when he thinks something.
Well, and we'd want them to.
Yeah.
I know it's maybe picky, but if they are participating, does it sound like they're equal to the Board of Selectmen?
They have no right to vote. So.
Yeah,
No.
right.
I think they're allowed to have discussion, whereas
Okay.
a public audience couldn't just jump into a conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
Not the right to vote.
I mean,
If he
participating,
thinks-
again, are we getting into the weeds of wording here, but,
No, it's
full right of
participation.
participation sounds very legal to me, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not hard-versed with it. So, there you go.
I think Commissioner Brett and Bob, please correct me if I'm wrong, that just means he's able to, I think, recommend motions and more collaboratively speak on the conduction of the meeting.
Okay.
He just has, this is just saying he can participate fully like he's a Board of Selectmen member. Bob, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but he doesn't have the ability to vote. So it's basically treating him like he's equal with
Okay.
no voting power, so he's.
Okay, I just asking.
So 4 is the, where it says, we can all read, I'm not gonna read like a PowerPoint, but,
But maybe we should, since it's being.
no, but is this the section where we try to incorporate the language that was suggested regarding reporting, because it's reporting
Yes.
to,
Well, I think 4 is a specific
It's a
report.
it's a specific
An
report.
annual report.
The town manager budget one, or separate?
I don't think this is the budget report, but this is, at the end of each fiscal year, we get a report that tells us whether there's a deficit
Right.
or a surplus and the like, and that's a specific kind of report which this is addressing.
I just have a very quick drafting comment, Franklin, for finances and administrative, could we put this on the maybe list for defined terms?
Sure, no objection, right, Chair?
How about a maybe? Yeah, because I guess it's kind of vague, because, at
To
the
me,
end
it
of
seems vague.
at the end of fiscal year, that means June 30th?
Yeah.
Or does that mean 30 days later? Does that mean 80 days later? I mean, I
So
know we
just
can't
from-
that specific, but, some of us privately have to close our books by a certain date. And this is basically, get it
Well,
done
this is, it's as of the end of each
As of
fiscal
at
year.
the end of the fiscal year.
So just from a logistics standpoint, like, if you took this literally, can you go a full 12 months without having transparency about the budget? And it's a surprise at the end of the year that there's a deficit? Or are you getting periodic reports throughout the year, so it's not a surprise at the end of the fiscal year of what's being reported? So that's where I'm a little confused, because
Well,
it's,
I know
and I'm
that,
asking from the Board of Finance.
I know that my board gets quarterly reports from the finance director. We have members of the Board of Selectmen here who can talk about what they get. We get monthly reports, sorry. I read the quarterly report.
Item 2 requires that they submit periodic reports, and that can be what, if
Yeah,
the Board of Selectmen said we want quarterly financials, that's what.
Yeah?
So we don't get, just the Board of Finance gets quarterly financial updates
Monthly.
from the finance director. In my time, I've never gotten a formal report from the first selectman telling me the activities that have taken place in that fiscal year, the budget status of that fiscal year, in a formal manner, right? We have started getting capital updates from certain people. We do get periodic updates, but there's no, I have not, Steve could weigh in our two, I haven't seen a formal fiscal year end report from the town manager to the Board of Selectmen, like what you guys get from the finance director. It's only me sharing the finance stuff to the board for your meetings.
Well, according to the charter, you're entitled to it.
So,
Well, also, this also talks about it's available to the public. Is that being
Yeah.
done? Right now, I'm just curious.
could be the
She's
manager's
not getting
report
it.
of every
Yeah.
month, kind of.
Because it's, you guys aren't getting it, the public's not getting it, so I'm concerned that this
Well,
isn't,
has anybody read it? In the public, I don't.
well, I don't know.
I've never seen one.
No, I don't think I've seen one
But
until
that
it comes
doesn't mean
budget
anything.
time, that's when I see it.
That doesn't
Posted?
mean anything.
Yeah. Okay.
It's at the budget, we get we get a budget letter, we get the budget.
Well, that's when we pass the budget,
Yeah.
but at the end of the year, we get a
Yeah,
report.
we don't, we have not, that I know.
And it should be posted on the website.
It should be. So then we're missing
We,
our duties.
I mean, maybe it is.
Yeah.
I've never
I-
looked
You're
for it,
entitled
but I
to.
assumed it was.
Lisa wants to make a comment, I don't know if I don't know what the rule is.
You're in charge.
You can recognize anyone.
I'm gonna recognize Lisa because she's raising her hand and she's the chair of the Board of Finance.
Share information. So we get multiple reports. We get monthly financial, which are consolidated reports, quarterly, which are expanded reports. We have the audit, which are reported every year, and that's the annual financial, comprehensive financial report, which is posted on the town website. An informal annual report is posted on the town website, but I do think for transparency's quarterly reports, there should be a requirement that they're posted on the town website, whether that requirement is mandated by the Board of Selectmen, off charter, or through the charter. We can certainly make that request to increase what we post on the Board of Finance page. But to your point, Chris, it is crucial that it be there, because if one person looks at it, it's worth it. The other people who look at it are people who want to invest in bonding in the town. That's the type of thing that they will look at, or an investor who is coming to, a developer who's coming to town looks at the town's financial situation. So there is value in that, whether it should be in the charter or not.
Can I ask a question, can I ask Wendy a question, or and Steve? So just building on what you were just saying about, so now I'm looking at 6,
Jump in the
right? Sorry,
They don't have this in front of them, by the way.
Oh, okay. So that one is keep the Board of Selectmen fully advised of the financial condition and anticipated future financial needs of the town. So if I'm hearing you right, tell me, are you all not, do you guys ever get like budget updates in your meetings periodically?
We really don't get, I mean, formally, we don't
Like-
get what the Board of Finance gets as far as the financial condition of the town. Well, I get it as a liaison.
Yeah, no, I guess what I'm, like,
Yeah.
periodically during a meeting, you don't have anybody saying, okay, this is where we're at, this is what our budget was, this is where we're at.
We're
No,
blowing this
it's-
section up.
It's available, and it is available and goes to the Board of Finance. And I would get it and forward it to our board, but it doesn't come from the town manager.
Directly to
Maybe
you.
it should.
Is the Board of Finance the one generating it?
No,
They're not. You're not generating
the
those
Director of
reports?
Finance is.
The finance director does it. We prescribe the form and the content that we want to review.
I guess I just again, I don't mean to keep beating this dead horse, it's like, it feels like it's there
Yeah.
for you right
Yeah.
now.
Well, that's what I'm
That's the
saying. I think
point,
there's a
yeah.
difference between the changes we're charged with making and stuff that's already in the charter and not being done. I think if we're going into what you said we shouldn't do, which I agreed with, which is, okay, now we have to say, no, now he has to do this specific report to this specific person, and then we're gonna be here for 3 years. So, like, I think it's better that if there's an issue with enacting what's already there, that really doesn't have that much to do with why
Right.
we're here as much, and I think
Yeah, I mean,
And
maybe
it's-
we put in some language about penalties for not fulfilling these duties, but I don't know if we need to.
But I don't know what those would be because that's, they
No,
can fire it.
I know.
and who
Yeah.
enforces
What
what,
we're
and
hearing
then
is
no,
that
I get it.
But
the
does 4 and
process
6 actually need to be
isn't
combined?
exactly what's prescribed here, but the information is going to the board. It's just going through the Board of
Different ways.
Finance and the finance director to the first selectman person and then to the Board of Selectmen.
So back to my question about, are we getting this just at the end of the year? 6 goes into, we're getting the financial condition of the town as periodic updates. Because he has to keep them advised about that, but it doesn't say how often.
I strategically, what we've been asked to do is to look at this and see if we need to make a change now. Whether it actually happens in practice or not is not within our purview. So what we can do is just look at this and say, does this stay here or does this not go in or not, or do we have to add something without constraining the charter? Because if we put it in there, it's going to be 10 years before it can be amended. language as simple as possible is probably better.
I actually don't see anything wrong with 4 from that perspective, in my opinion. I think if it's not being made available to
That's a
the
different
public or
story.
whatever, that's really has nothing
Yeah,
to
that's
do
not
with.
something we can do.
We're not gonna be able to put something, unless we're gonna get real specific and say, it needs to be on the website, it needs to be on the, and I just think
But
that
should
goes
we
way beyond
Put a
what.
deadline, I mean, end of fiscal year, I'm just wondering, is that enough of a deadline?
As of the end of the fiscal year.
Okay,
it's-
that's,
The end of each fiscal year.
Well, yeah, this is, I don't think the report can be finished
Right.
on
the
Right,
that's what I'm saying, it really can't
It has to
be.
be afterward.
It has to, I mean,
Yeah.
again, I'm running a business, I can't close my books on December 31st, I need another month, so that's why, that's why I'm wondering, is this wording actually not accurate for what has to get done because of lapse of June 30th, the fiscal year's over, but there's still things to run through.
So maybe
It
the
says
language
as
of it
of-
is public, like the public complete reports on the finances, on the administrative activities, like the activities as of the end of the year, and that's not necessarily a deadline. You see, like, the report has to contain the activities of the town as of the end of the year, so the
Yeah.
report itself, it's not a date for the report, it's the content of the report has to
Yeah,
be
because I
on the
read this-
activities through the end of the year.
the year.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
when that's due, I guess, isn't addressed at all.
And that's, I don't think we should
No.
be in, so it just says as of the end, so
That's what it
that's
says,
good.
as of, it doesn't say at. It's activities as of.
No, but I'm saying it's not even a deadline at all, it's the content of the report
it's the annual
is through
report.
the end of
Yeah.
the year.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I would think that would be in the job position description that the BO Board of Selectmen sets up and says, hey, we need this within 6 weeks or 8
Right.
weeks, whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's,
So we're good with 4,
Yeah.
the way it's
Yep.
written. So 5, make recommendations to the Board of Selectmen concerning the affairs of the town and facilitate the work of the Board of Selectmen in developing policy.
It's fine.
That's good.
6, keep the.
Sounds good to me.
Does, okay, going back,
Still trying to find a home for you.
facilitate the, okay, so the Board of Selectmen is making the policy, but they're helping. Okay, I'm just making sure I'm reading this properly.
Are we all good with 5?
Yes.
Okay, 6. The Board of Selectmen fully advises the financial condition and anticipated future financial needs of the town.
That's reasonably reasonable.
That's reasonable, right?
Prepare and submit to the Board of
Is there
Selectmen.
something say on a consistent basis versus just, or is that
Well, I
some-
think it fully advised makes an assumption
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
it's,
And then,
it's not once every 6 months.
Yeah.
7, prepare and submit to the Board of Selectmen an annual town budget.
yes.
Better do that.
Pretty straightforward.
At the time of an emergency disaster, so so this emergency and disaster thing.
It came up in conversation.
Yeah, and so emergency needs to be defined somehow.
I can add that to the.
Yes, please.
Can we go back to 6? I'm sorry. I was looking at Paul's notes here. He said keep the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance fully advised of the financial condition. It's something that Paul recommended.
Well, but can we address that in the Board of Finance section of the charter?
Well, no, I mean, yes, we could.
Yes, we
I don't
could.
mean-
But we need to put it in the town manager
But
section.
this is where I think, or is
Yeah.
relates to the basic issue of whether the town manager has responsibility to other elected boards or other boards and commissions besides the Board of Selectmen. And so, Paul and Lisa have both made suggestions along those lines. I don't know if we do it in 6.
Well, that almost sounds like it's an added responsibility, like an addition to
It
13,
could
it
be,
becomes a
but-
14th item possibly.
It could be, but that's really the point
Yeah.
that I was making earlier, is that I think one thing we do want to clarify, among others, is that the town manager, as the supervisor of the town staff, has an obligation to make sure that all of the boards get access to all of the information they need, and they get it in the time they need to act on it. And, I'd like that expressed somewhere here.
Yeah, right.
Paul's
I agree.
is partly along the way, Lisa's another way, but that's what I think we need to do.
Put the Board of Finance there.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, this is, because it's about, because 6 is about the financial
Yeah.
condition.
Right.
So that mentions the Board of Finance. I have no objection
Makes sense
to
to me.
making them tell us what's going on.
I mean, just pushing send to another
I mean,
group.
but again,
But-
well, I mean, we.
But
We don't wanna
I'm
limit
not- I'm not
the-
suggesting we don't get it right now. We get it mostly through the finance director,
Right.
but the town manager attends almost all our meetings anyway.
But because the information that's being asked for is not just from the Board of Finance, we're talking about elected boards and commissions, we wanna be more comprehensive instead of just talking about finances, cause there could be additional information
Yeah.
that needs to be disseminated to the elected boards and commissions on a timely basis to help them do their job.
Yes.
So we wanna be, in that case, a little bit more ambiguous about what that is.
Well, I think
right?
paragraph 6 is specific to finance administration, and it's related to 4. I personally would add a separate
Well, that's
paragraph to
what-
address the point
Yeah,
that I was making.
that's
But
what I would suggest
I
as
just
well,
wanted to bring
because
Paul's-
we're talking about all elected boards and commissions getting the information that they need.
And making the town manager.
My concern with opening up like that, instead of going through the Board of Selectmen, is some commissioners may say, well, I need to have all our properties evaluated by 2 separate evaluators on the value of the cost value of these every year. And then the Board of Selectmen says, well, that's gonna be outrageously expensive. Well, that's what we need to do our job. So I think, I
Well,
mean,
but can you have a caveat to that, that with, because some of those things are prescribed by state statute, so you can, I mean, like reevaluation, that's prescribed by state statute, I believe.
that's for, personal property, but I'm thinking like maybe the schools want values of the schools, or they want the value of vacant property. We need to know what that is every year. We don't read. And maybe you really don't, because there's a cost associated with that, and I think that should go through the Board of Selectmen to work with those committees and say, what do you really need, and let's get, we need that, maybe we're gonna do it every 5 years, or we're gonna get you this, but, because there's restricted resources, so we can't just have every commission
If
say,
we
I
limit
want
it to
those
elected
things.
boards and commissions, the boards and commissions that are elected are Board of Ed, Board of Finance, zoning, planning,
Assessment.
assessment appeals, and zoning board of appeals. That's it, right? Everybody else
Library
is,
board.
the library board.
How is that information determined now? What's required, and who makes the decision to dedicate those resources to do it? Is there a problem with that? Are we trying to fix something that doesn't?
Well, I think
is
there's
there
a problem that we've heard is specifically from the Board of Finance, that they're not getting information on a timely basis, because in that case, it's costing the town money, potentially, because we're not getting the information that they need to do their job, to do bond evaluation, like, to take advantage of things like that. So,
Can't work that out with the Board of Selectmen? To fall on deaf ears, I don't know.
There's that tri-board thing.
I don't know.
well, but the tri-board thing is,
Yeah,
they do that you do that once a
So,
year.
just to be clear,
It's
this is
budgetary.
not a problem with the current town manager.
No, but it wasn't.
But yes, there have been
there have been
times when we
times.
could not get the information that we needed.
Right.
And
I'm just thinking
And
that should be defined in the town manager's job, and then he's evaluated on that, and he goes, hey, you're not getting Board of Finance their information, you're not doing your job. Not that the Board of Finance can go, oh, it's in the
right,
charter.
but I mean, personally, I'd like to see it defined in the charter. Again, because this, I'm a government employee myself, and this is speaking as a petty bureaucrat. This is how I could arrogate authority to myself, is by withholding information. And I think we want to make it clear that it is the duty of the town manager. I mean, we're not specifying the mechanisms here. We're not specifying any punitive measures here. But just to clarify, it is the duty of the town manager to make sure everybody gets what they need to do the jobs they're elected to do. Because it doesn't always happen.
Yeah, I guess my thought would be, as long as it's defined by the Board of
Yeah,
Selectmen.
I mean, you're right, it can be abused, and there can be conflicts among the different boards, but I don't know how we can eliminate all of that. And it's a question of, do we want to, are we more worried about that kind of conflict, or are we more worried about an administrator who withholds information? I've only had experience with the latter and not the former, so I'm more worried about that.
So if we added language to whatever statement we want to add to this list, okay, about as information that pertains to the elected boards or commissions that, I don't know how to word it, that pertain to their specific description of their commission. So they can't ask for arbitrary information that's irrelevant to their function.
But isn't that, oh, sorry.
So like the Board of Finance couldn't go say, I want an inventory of open space. And I want to use resources, and that's probably a bad example because that has a financial implication. So I'm just trying to think of something that would like be like information that you would request, that someone, an elected commission could request that is irrelevant to their job description.
If I
Just by saying I need that to do the job, and there's no other arbitrary, because it says in the
Right, so if we
charter.
refer back to what their charge is in the charter, that it's consistent with their charge as a commission.
Yeah.
So I can't, as the Board of Education, ask for a new POCD because I feel like it, or you know what I mean, like
Writing that
so
down.
But if I decided I hate Mark Nelson and I'm going to drive him crazy by exploiting this loophole to make him give reports, I would still need to get 3 other members of the Board of Finance to go along with
Right.
me. So you're talking about a whole board going a little crazy on these matters.
Yeah.
Now, it's still a possibility, obviously. We see a whole Congress going crazy. But I think the more likely scenario is a problem with the staff, and that's why I'm concerned about that.
And
That's
giving
why I-
accountability where it needs to be held.
Where would you like that language put?
I think, well, again, I haven't written the language, but
But no, where
yeah,
would
I
you
think
like
it would. I would add a separate paragraph
number
to section
14.
502A. Yeah,
Okay.
add 14.
What if since we seem to keep coming back to the Board of Finance, getting the information right. Take Paul's suggestion, right? So you say, so in 6, you say, keep the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance fully advised as to the financial condition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe you tack on a phrase like, and make sure they receive all necessary information in a timely manner, or whatever
Yeah,
that language should be. I don't
this-
wonder if you could.
this
That's where
language
we're
that
going
the-
off the rails, we're
Yeah.
being too specific in here.
Yeah.
By saying all necessary, then it should be
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
whatever's defined.
yeah,
by-
I'm just trying to see if there's a.
Lisa's
you just
suggestion
kind of
was
put it in
required
there.
that the information and staffing and support that the commissions require, the boards and commissions require to fulfill their duties under state law and the charter and to meet state mandated filing deadlines. In other words, yeah.
I
like
don't
that.
disagree with Lisa's suggestion about language for an additional.
If we can reference an existing document like state law, then I guess that's fine, because we're not redefining and trying to
absolutely.
parse out what each committee is supposed to have.
Well, yeah, I think it should go back to state statute.
So,
Yeah, that works.
Okay, so,
So we're making a suggestion to add item 14.
I would suggest that we add an item 14 that would read as provide such resources, analysis, staffing, and support to all elected boards and commissions as such boards and commissions require to fulfill their duties under state law and the charter and to meet state mandated deadlines.
Thank you.
Well, I got it.
It's plagiarizing from Lisa.
That's how I got elected in the first place.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
hers, yeah.
So I'm gonna open a can of worms. So it's been discussed a couple of times about grants in and it's come up a couple of times about who has the ability to apply for, decide what grants are being applied for, and the order of operation of that, because sometimes there's grants that have to be applied for quickly before there's a board of selectmen meeting. Is that the paragraph to add grant language, because we're talking about, or is that
we
a
gotta
separate?
think, well, let's,
Maybe, well, I don't know, there's a contract section that
I believe there's a part in the charter I gotta find it that actually specifically says grant applications for the board of selectmen.
It does?
that-
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that if,
I'm reading it.
Oh, I remember
right,
reading that.
Yes,
Yes,
I'm
you're right.
aware of
I can
this.
find that while the commission can.
Okay, that's fine. I think that probably does not belong in the duties of the, to spell it out as detailed as we want to,
Right.
not
Okay.
hold,
Okay,
Their hands
we'll
back. We'll
we'll
come back to
revisit
it.
that when we go to the
Okay.
grant section then.
so 7. Right? We do 7 already? I'm sorry.
did
I went
7
back
already.
to 6, I apologize.
So 8
Okay.
talks about emergency or disaster, and you wanted to add those as
Yeah,
Um,
that should be
terms.
defined somewhere,
Yeah.
because, you know,
spend the necessary funds to assure the smooth operation of the town business and health, safety, and well-being of the town and its residents consistent with this charter.
Can we, and I'm sorry, can I ask, Wendy, at some point before you had said that there was some confusion about who's notified in an emergency situation?
When we had the
Remember?
microburst in the center.
Yeah, I
and
mean,
what
is there,
constitutes an emergency, I think.
Yeah.
What constitutes it and who declares the actual
That- yeah,
emergency
and
and
I'm wondering-
emergency and
yeah,
that doesn't come to the, that's not part of my purview.
Mhm.
I find out about it
Yeah.
or get told about it, but I have no say to make it happen
Okay.
or be at the table.
so should we,
I don't think that's where this is
I was just gonna say, yeah,
defining
no.
state emergency, it just,
yeah, no, I get it, no, I think, I mean,
Yeah.
state defines an emergency, you know, there's,
No, but-
but what I'm trying to get at is, should we put something in here, like in consultation with the first or something along those lines, so our first selectman is not
But
left
this,
out?
this just doesn't say he declares it.
Yeah,
This
no,
just
no,
says
no,
once
no,
it's
right.
already been.
This just says what his
Yeah.
duties are at the time.
Yeah,
and
no,
he
no,
does
no,
that.
I agree. I know, I understand all that. I'm trying to tie the first selectman into this somehow. That's all I'm trying to do.
Unless we add something,
Yeah.
or unless it's here and I missed it, I mean, something specific about our procedure in emergencies, then this I think, gives the town manager carte blanche to declare an emergency in the way. I think Wendy's got a point to make, too.
We're talking about being able to use funds and calling it an emergency use of the funds without going to the board of selectmen.
Exactly.
Which has happened in the past, and who determines if that is an emergency that those funds have to be used.
And that's something we do need to clarify in the charter, I believe.
It doesn't have to do with the emergency operations center thing, it's about funding,
So-
using money.
So in other words, if we have a process for declaring the emergency and all that, then this isn't a problem, but
Right.
as it stands alone, it is.
Section 405 of the charter is about emergency ordinances.
that doesn't even describe who, I'm reading it, and that doesn't even describe who initiates it, actually.
it's how you can skip public hearing and other notice requirements.
Right, but you're right, it does not anywhere.
It's more life safety stuff. If a water main breaks, there's a huge hole in Main Street. You gonna just leave it there, or you gonna get someone out there, turn the water off to steel plates and?
Is there a state definition of,
Of an emergency?
I would think there's gotta be something.
Yes, there's a statute on emergency powers.
There's your defined
It's been invoked 3 or 4 times in the last 10 years or so. And even as recently as COVID, the town, and there's a process within that statute. We can circulate that statute for the next meeting.
Is that statute referenced in our charter currently?
I don't know that it's referenced specifically in the charter, but it is one of those statutes that applies no matter what the charter says.
So that would be your defined term, right?
yeah, I think,
So emergency
When we
means.
when we did the COVID declaration of emergency, we pulled that stuff together and circulated it. There's a process to it. The governor has to be notified. An emergency is, I define an emergency as something that everybody agrees is an emergency. It's not,
You know when you see
it's
it.
not a matter of convenience, like you want to avoid it. You want to avoid noticing the meeting, or you forgot to notice the meeting, and you emergency and have an emergency meeting. That's not what an emergency is. But I think it would be helpful if we circulate the statute and maybe use the COVID emergency as an example.
But we would, assuming that we wanted to make the term emergency more inclusive than the state definition, because I don't know if, for example, the microburst would count as an emergency under state law. That probably wouldn't be a problem, though, would it?
What was the life safety issue would be?
If
There's
we
trees
say,
across the
because
road
what
there.
we're talking about is not expending state funds, but simply
Town funds.
determining when funds can be dispersed outside of the ordinary process because we think it's important to get it done quickly. So, well, you don't have to answer that off the top of your head, but I think that's a question we need to think about.
I think it's time for us to define emergency, that's when that question will come.
Or it could be like with administrative officer and executive, we could use a different term. We
Yeah.
could say
Yeah.
an exigent situation and just do it that. But we need to agree on what the process is gonna be.
Right, but we're fine with him execute.
Yeah.
8 is written,
Eight is
we just
fine.
have to figure out how to define emergency
Well,
somewhere else.
Yeah, and
I mean, I see Paul suggested that we add that, we make it subject to consultation with the first select person. I think we need to build in a little bit more process than that, but at least that would be a start for 8. So, I mean, 8 should be subject to some other provision that we haven't written yet.
I just want to call the commission's attention to section 810. You don't have it in front of you in this packet, but if you brought your binder, it's in there. That just talks about emergency appropriations. It doesn't really mention the town manager, it mentions the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, the votes needed for them to spend money for
okay,
that. So section 810 and then where we discussed it previously.
so there is a check and
So,
balance for it.
Well, but 810 deals with emergency appropriations, and as I read, sorry.
28-1, 3 says emergency means any occasion or instance in which documentation, determination of the governor or the president, state or federal assistance is needed. So that's, or local efforts and capabilities to save lives and protect property. That may be too narrow for what you're discussing, but there is statutory definition of an emergency, and then there's a process laid out in that same chapter 517. Declare emergency, what happens next. Again, it may be too narrow for your consideration, but it could be referenced here. Emergency is defined in chapter 517.
It's going to be an interesting.
We'll pull that stuff together and send it out.
That's where we're gonna.
So item 8, does it need to refer back to section 810?
Yeah, 810 has to do with emergency appropriations. And as I read 8, the way it's written now, it would authorize the town manager to expend money without an appropriation, which is something we might want in an appropriate emergency, but I don't think we want to leave that exclusively at the discretion of the town manager. So we need to build in a process, and I
That's what I was saying.
Does the language consistent with this charter mean that it catches the checks and balances in the charter?
right,
we
except
could
that
refer
right
to the
now the
section.
charter doesn't have those checks and
Right.
balances,
Yeah.
but
Like,
yeah.
Well, doesn't 810?
810?
810 does, doesn't it?
810's got it.
Again,
They're conflicting.
it does, yeah.
Yeah.
810 tells us how we can, how the elected boards can appropriate funds. It doesn't say that in an emergency, the fund can't be expended without an appropriation, which is what 5028 says, right? It says, at the time of an emergency or disaster, expend the necessary funds. And again, we can imagine a situation in which you can't get the boards together fast enough to issue an appropriation. It may be a matter of an hour, and maybe there's a fire or some sort of emergency. But we need some sort of process that doesn't
broken pipe dumping sewage into the Farmington River.
Yeah.
You can't notice a meeting, you just have to,
Do it.
the town manager has to be empowered to act in an emergency situation. And the other provisions we're talking about allows the boards and commissions to backfill what could have been done before if it wasn't an emergency.
So it may be something as simple as
This actually
consultation
came up
with the first
in
selectman.
Big storms a few years ago. I don't know, Lisa, were you first selectman at that time?
I was not, I was chair of public safety at the time, or I was on the public safety committee, I can't remember if I was chair or not.
Yeah.
But that did go through an appropriation. We had an emergency meeting with the Board of Finance who voted to appropriate the money, and we did that very quickly. You can expend money, you can authorize, and it, like, the sewage goes and you have to act quickly. But there is time after that to call a meeting and ratify the expenditure or to ratify further expenditures. It's just to meet the immediate need until you can have a meeting. It should not be, okay, great, we're gonna dredge the whole Farmington River for a cost of $5 million. They committed that money during emergency. No, it's the steps you had to take prior to the time you can call a meeting.
Well, it's not dissimilar to what insurance companies require you to do, right? Where, so if you have a tree fall on your house, you need to secure your home before you make your claim, and they come out and take pictures and do all that stuff, right? They require you to do that, so that's
Cover
not
the
any
whole
different. Like, right, so it's not any different than we need to plug the leak and then do what we need to do and figure out how much we're spending on
And there's
rectifying.
almost always time to call a meeting unless, communications are down. And even then, police can go door to door and give you the notice, which was done in the past.
So do we need to add anything to 8? About in consultation with
I would,
the Board of Selectmen?
yeah.
Does it
I
say
need to
first
tie her.
selectman and or Board of Selectmen?
But what if the first select person's not around
If
and
she's
now
on
it's a
va-
deputy?
He or
or-
she's
yeah.
on vacation, or should it say first selectman or deputy?
Town manager's on vacation.
Canton has language that you can model it after.
What is that language, Lisa?
It's in the document I gave you. Number 5.
Thank you.
Oh, there it is.
Speak up.
Obviously, they don't refer to Simsbury, I added those.
So it says first selectman, deputy, or in the absence of either, another selectman.
So this is when we want to declare it. So it's more the spending of the funds though, right?
Yeah.
I have to excuse myself, I have to run to another meeting, but I'll catch up with Frank.
Sure, you're-
I
Thank you for
think
your
this is
assistance.
good, but I think
Thanks.
this is kind of what Bert's saying,
We
it's
need
more
to have a-
appropriate for the process.
Yeah.
Process,
Right.
right.
But-
So I think.
Just slightly different than what I
So do
think.
you wanna propose just adding in consultation with,
Well, here's a detailed process, and all we would have to do with 5028 is say, rather consistent with this charter or consistent with
With section.
whatever section
Right.
Yeah,
this
Right.
becomes.
yeah, I think that would be better.
so we could just leave it as is, cause it says consistent with this charter.
It says consistent.
And then we can maybe put a section in once we
Yeah.
define a
And
section.
then-
Do that, yeah.
Franklin, just note, we wanna add a section number when we talk about this.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
In section, on line 8, or
Yes.
at the end, where it says consistent with this charter.
Yes.
Make a note that we wanna add a section number when we talk about the emergency authority later.
This would be somewhere
In
in chapter
accordance
4.
to, accordance to section whatever.
Whatever the section number is gonna be.
Add the charter section number.
Yeah. So 9, are we good with 8?
Yes.
Yes.
9, assist the Board of Selectmen to develop long-term goals, including economic development for the town and strategies to implement such goals.
I'm just curious, and again, maybe Pastor, why, we almost narrowed it by including economic development? I mean, there's other things we shouldn't be including, but it almost sounds like this pulls it out, like if he doesn't or she doesn't they're not doing their job. You know what I'm
So
saying?
that's exactly what the goal, because as we still have these conversations today, there's a concern about economic development in this town, shall we say, and the coming from different places, the board, Main Street, there's people, the chamber, so I think we felt at the time that we're trying to make it a little bit clearer that this has got to be a priority of this individual.
But does that then limit the Board of Selectmen from prioritizing other things if it goes against economic development? I'm just.
Well, see, and to that note,
And it's
so
long-term
economic
goals.
development, in my mind, isn't just development. Economic development is also retention.
Sure,
Right.
absolutely,
Right.
absolutely.
Because if we're looking for, because the ultimate goal, I think, from what I'm going to read into this is grandless growth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so is grandless growth just building houses, or is grandless growth retaining businesses or attracting businesses to existing buildings?
All good,
right?
yeah, all good questions. I'm just saying, from back
Yeah.
then, we were like, we seem to not have any plan.
I know. No, we
Let's,
Right, but-
let's make this a priority.
Oh, right, I realize.
Let's assure this is a
But
priority.
it almost is like this is a priority over any other long-term goals that the Board of Selectmen might come, like, okay, this has got to be number one no matter what. Well, 8 years from now, it may not be I just don't want to
Absolutely,
limit.
I'm with you.
I'm just
I'm with you.
being a.
Yeah.
So-
It just says including, so I
Right.
don't think necessarily that interpretation is how I read it.
But it could
Just-
also. Okay.
But I understand it
Yeah.
could be, but since it says including, it just signifies that that goal is important enough that needs to be expressively stated. But it doesn't necessarily, from the language that I'm reading, doesn't give any weight. It just says that economic development is one of the goals.
Right, because it
So
talks about
for-
long-term goals overall.
Yeah, and doesn't exclude anything.
So for those who've been through this process before, and because we've been asked to simplify the language and keep it and clean this up, what if we removed including economic development and had it say, this is the Board of Selectmen, et cetera, to develop long-term goals for the town and strategies to implement such goals? Would that make a difference? Would that make it irrelevant in this day and age? Because this was added 8 years ago.
I don't think it would make it irrelevant, because if it's consistent with the goals that the priorities that the Board of Selectmen set, if they don't set economic development as a goal, then it shouldn't be the goal of the town manager.
Right.
I mean,
That's
and
what I'm getting.
some of the points that were made, and I made one of them, was if the metrics by which we're measuring our staff are inconsistent with the goals that we have as a town, that's grandless growth, for example. If that's part of the rubric that they're being reviewed on, but we protect open space, how could you can't have both, right?
So should we take it out?
I think we should take it out, but I know economic development's a hot button issue around here.
Well, what town
It's a
is it?
loaded.
I guess.
Because
No.
what Melissa
Yeah.
says is correct. The way it reads to someone who doesn't know this, right?
Yep.
These are people who probably will not pay attention to this ever. They probably think that the long-term goals are primarily economic development because it says including economic development.
It highlights some.
It highlights something.
I mean, if we said, right, because you're not saying including economic development, preservation of open space, this, that, like,
We're almost picking that one piece out of the whole long-term goal and putting a spotlight on. And again, I'm all for economic development. Don't get me wrong here.
So what I would do would be to remove this and see, we have to send this to the Board of Selectmen anyway, so they could come back and say, no, we want this language back in here because of what we see at this point. And I would say, because our charter is to simplify the language, we would remove this at this point, and they may not accept it, and that would be fine.
I just bring up points.
anybody have an opinion on it?
Or you could say such as, instead of including, to give an example.
I just feel like that person will then get charged. If
Yeah,
there is an
that's
economic
right.
development, now he's not met this goal because that wasn't a long-term goal of the Board of Selectmen.
Because 8 years from now, the long-term goals could be completely different. We could have met our economic development goals, and we may want to do something different, like,
Stop that.
Commissionership
We'll get tired of winning.
The goals by the Board of Selectmen change each term.
Right.
So this section could read that it's just assist the Board of Selectmen with their goals, completing them, whatever they be. And it's up to the Board
Right.
of Selectmen to decide.
It shouldn't be specific
Yeah.
to include a goal.
See,
Yeah.
good point.
So, Madam Chair, what I'm hearing is assist the Board of Selectmen to develop long-term goals and strategies to implement such goals, striking the language, including economic development.
Yeah.
Are we all in agreement with that? Can you live with that, Jeff?
Yeah, I can move.
Probably added that later.
Sorry.
And then you can work the back channels.
Yeah.
So 10, encourage and provide staff support for regional and intergovernmental cooperation. Okay. Anybody have any objection to that? Sounds great.
We should put intergalactic cooperation.
Become SpaceX.
There you go.
Promote 11 is promote partnerships among the Board of Selectmen, staff, and citizens in developing public policy and building a sense of community.
So as the immigrant in the room, I suggest that we remove citizens and put residents, because we do have lots of non-citizens in the town.
Commissioner.
Good point.
Chair, Madam Chair, and if the commission agrees with that, we can do a search and see all the points where, as you mentioned, gender inclusive language and language regarding the nature like this. We can change all citizens language to residents, and we can compile a
Yep.
list where all those changes are for your ultimate approval.
Okay, so
That's a good point.
I'm gonna be
Yeah,
devil's advocate here. There are business owners that are not Board of Selectmen staff or residents, and they have a, so,
That's correct.
Hey, that's a good point.
Should it be Board of Selectmen, staff, residents, and taxpayers?
There you go, taxpayers.
yeah, I
Choice.
do like that.
Well, because that
qualifies them.
Qualifies them, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I didn't know how to add that, and thank you.
Board of Selectmen staff, comma, residents, comma,
And taxpayers.
Yes.
instead of and citizens.
Correct.
Yeah.
We have permanent residents, we have people on visas.
Yeah, no.
Yep, that's a
No.
very good point. And then adding taxpayers for those people who don't,
Fall into.
Fall into those
Citizens
other
that aren't
categories.
taxpayers.
But they have a,
but they own a business.
You have citizens that aren't taxpayers, absolutely, you can't.
yeah, no, I like that, no,
But they don't live in the town.
yeah, they
They
are.
live in town, paying rent,
I guess.
but they're not really.
Right. Well,
But the rent includes the.
okay, so we've
Yeah.
got both. We have residents and we have taxpayers.
Taxpayers.
Yeah, yeah, I think that covers better.
Okay.
My son never paid
Populace.
any
Thank
taxes.
Wait. 12. You have that, Franklin?
Yes, I
Thank you.
have promote partnerships among the Board of Selectmen, staff, residents, and taxpayers in developing public policy and building a sense of
Yes.
So, okay, so since we're adding words to this,
Even though we're trying to take out words.
can we add collaboration, partnerships and collaborations?
Sure.
Because we've heard a lot about that. And I think that's more inclusive language.
Like it, yeah.
You good with that?
Yeah.
Okay, promote partnerships
Good job.
and collaborations among the,
Okay, so.
Okay.
No more word, no. 12, exercise such powers and perform such duties as they may be required by ordinance or resolution of the Board of Selectmen not inconsistent with this charter.
Is that a
And then it says
Catch-all.
and.
That's the
That's your catch-all.
other duties as assigned kind of stuff.
That's a catch-all,
Wait,
right?
but what
Shouldn't that
is,
be the last one?
why does it say,
That's right.
Oh, because there's a
That's-
13.
because there's a 13. But we can take away and because we're adding 14. So we're gonna add and to 13.
Potentially. I almost think that should be the last one.
That's right.
Number 12 should almost be the very last.
So from a
No,
drafting
we're doing
perspective.
13 and
No, no.
14, we just added
She means the
14.
order.
Meaning the order, the number 12 should be the last one on the
It
list.
should be.
Oh.
If it's
Drop
number
it down
14,
to
number
14.
18, whatever number is
Oh.
going to be.
Yeah, because from
It's
a
kind of like
drafting rules, the catch-all comes at the
very
very end.
end.
Okay, so we're gonna move 12 to 14.
I'm a really good arguer.
12.
So 13 is gonna become 12.
13, okay.
Which we're going to expand.
12 is gonna become 14, and our proposed 14 becomes 13.
Yes.
I know it's silly, but it's a catch-all.
Who's on first?
Right.
Sorry, repeat one time.
Oh, come on, Franklin.
12.
So 12 becomes 14,
Gotcha.
the last item. 13 becomes 12, and our proposed 14 becomes 13.
Right, right.
And we're gonna talk about the new 12 in a second. Right?
New 13, right?
You
The
13.
new
Well,
13.
Well, 12 is assist the Board of Finance preparation annual town report. In a timely manner, like, or we did talk about. Or is that the fourth?
That's the new
Is that
13.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. We may not need 14.
Yeah, we
Okay.
may.
So
Well,
in-
the new section, the new bullet was supposed to make the board of, the town manager report to the Board of Finance on this one particular thing, correct? Is that what I was thinking? Or am
Well,
I-
number 13, what's currently number 13
Yep.
has to do with a specific document that gets prepared each year. Very long. So it's different from what's gonna be the new number 13.
Right. Because it's an ongoing thing, it's not a one-time only thing.
Yeah.
But do we need to put anything, when assisting the Board of Finance in preparation of the annual town report, do we need to put anything more detailed
I
in
don't
that?
think so.
Okay.
I think we're good with,
Okay,
I don't think so.
I'm just asking a question.
Okay, so,
Before we get to administration, there were a lot of comments about meeting minutes, agendas, properly noticing. I don't know if that's administrative or if that's another duty.
But- but is that something that we should be putting, is it for, that applies to all boards and commissions
Yeah.
as an overarching thing in the
Well, I think
charter?
the question was, is it the responsibility of the town manager?
No.
Sure, then.
Because that's more staff, as a staff.
That ultimately falls to him.
It's
or her.
where we don't have it posted on the
Right.
town website, but it's required to current.
Oh, right.
So the question is,
Uh,
if
We might have
I
another
mean,
number.
we want all the boards and commissions to post their agendas and the documents they review in a timely manner on the website. Do we want to make someone, like the
Responsible.
town manager, accountable for it? So that if it doesn't happen, there's hell to pay.
To whom?
Such a pacifist way.
I don't have any, obviously I don't have an issue with that, but I guess I'm fascinated by this whole conversation, because if you don't post your
Right.
meeting and you don't have a legal like there's state repercussions
Right.
for some of this stuff.
But some of the information
So,
gets
yeah.
out like meetings
it's-
Monday and the
Yeah.
information gets posted
No,
Friday night, so
I
that's.
get it, I'm
yeah.
just,
Because we,
kinda curious.
it's addressed in the charter
Yeah.
about how that, because it talks about the state statutes
Of-
regarding.
Under the boards, right?
You know what,
I'm
can
not
we-
saying not
why don't we do
stuff, I'm
this?
just like,
Can we make a note, Franklin, that we may wanna revisit this conversation under the town manager responsibility after we review that section of the charter that pertains to meetings?
This is under
Do you know,
B, where are we?
so we're
Kind of,
we're still under responsibilities, but just make a note that we wanna, if meeting minutes and notice and stuff like that aren't addressed properly in another section of the charter, which we haven't reviewed yet, that we wanna revisit under the town manager
somewhere.
responsibilities.
It might be under town clerk, I can check.
Right, but,
oh, yeah, I bet.
So-
and the town clerk reports to the town manager.
But I'm still making the note, meeting minutes, agenda.
Instead of trying to add something now that we haven't visited
Yes, that's a
in
good.
the charter.
Right. It's been called to my attention that the materials.
This is number 3. I saw her fingers, I haven't gotten there yet.
That there's a provision, a state law governing, the Board of Education. We're talking about
Always us.
broadening that to all the town boards and commissions, which means it's not just something to discuss under the town manager. And the question is, do we want to add a provision, which it sounds like we do have a consensus on, that everybody should be posting these materials in a timely manner, and then the second question, the subsidiary question would be, is that going to be the ultimate responsibility of the town staff, of the Board of Selectmen, or of each individual board, which is probably the least effective solution.
Right.
But,
So we still comfortable revisiting that when we talk about?
I think so.
Okay.
Can I just put into record what Paul said about one of these?
Well, one of what?
What was number 12? Is it exercise such powers to perform such other duties if may be required by ordinance or resolution by the Board of Selectmen not inconsistent with the charter and resolution of Board of Selectmen not inconsistent. Did he just duplicate himself there?
Yep.
Okay, that was me. I was reading that the wrong way.
He was typing it on the way to speak.
Okay, well, okay. So he doubled, never mind.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
For emphasis.
So administration. I'm not gonna read it. I said I wasn't
Did
gonna
we
read
add
it
a,
before.
did we add a 14 yet?
We did add a 14.
Did we add a 13 yet?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I was reading
Yeah.
everyone else's notes.
This is the question on responsible to the Board of Selectmen
Yeah,
versus
right.
first selectman.
This is really, I think, where this is a provision where we can clarify, we could hope to clarify the relationship. And I don't know if the language I have in mind would do that.
Well, yeah, and Paul proposed some language about having the town manager being responsible to the first selectman or first select woman for the supervision, direction, and administration of all town departments, agencies, and offices.
So that's consistent with the idea I have, which doesn't necessarily appear, wouldn't necessarily appear in this paragraph, but clarifying that, that the reporting has to go through the first select person so that,
Right.
so
So, have we changed, proposed the language change to the town manager shall be responsible to the first select person?
I would say
Whatever-
first
or whatever
select person
title we're
rather
gonna
than
make
that
that.
of woman, but,
Right.
The question is, do we address it here or do we address it in the section dealing with the first select
I
person?
think we gotta do both.
So I think
Wait a
they
minute, hold
need
on.
to tie it, otherwise they will end up being inconsistency. So for now, what we could do is we could make a note that we've got to get B to tie with what's in part 4, and when we get to part 4, we tie them both at the same time.
The only thing, if you tie it, the responsible to the first selectman, then does that mean that the first selectman alone has the power to hire and fire? I think if you keep it as Board of Selectmen, I mean, I know where we're trying to go, and actually, I agree with it. I'm just wondering if you specify first selectman, if that gets you in trouble a completely different way.
It's got to be in consultation with the Board of Selectmen. That's what we're trying to get at, right?
Right.
So that's what the language has to suggest. First selectmen in consultation with the Board of Selectmen.
Well, yes, I mean, I
see where you're going.
both right. Is we want to describe a relationship between the town manager and the board as a whole, right? Which is one of, I'm not crazy about the language responsible to, because I think that's vague and gives a lot of leeway. I think, but something that implies more of a traditional reporting relationship. But then we want to create a role for the first select person, which is different from that. That is, that reporting relationship is with the board as a whole. But we want to say that the conduit for that report is the first select person. And I don't know.
So
I haven't sat down and drafted it.
No, I think that word responsible though is need to be changed, but to what? I'm not a wordsmith, so.
Well, my first, I wrote this late at night, but, whether it should be the town manager shall be subject to the direction of the board of, of selectmen, or subject to the supervision of the board of selectmen persons.
Because what you also don't wanna do is because the town manager is responsible for supervising specific positions. You don't want this language to look like the selectmen can interfere with the supervision of like the town clerk, the board, where it's prescribed later about exactly what positions he's responsible for. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
This is a tie drafting, so it's got to tie with something that's already in part 4. And we need to make sure that when we do part 4, that we come back to this and we fix it here.
So right now, make a note.
Just come back to this when we're reviewing 4, because we need to have them both say the same thing in different ways.
And that's where the language will become clear.
Think of it.
I think we put them together
Using
and
AI.
I don't.
Chat GPT is my new friend.
No.
Okay. So, is that rain?
Sounds like it.
I haven't opened up
Feels
yet.
like
Air conditioner.
Certainly not the air conditioner.
Okay. C.
Personnel. The town manager should be the personnel director. Now, this is where we need to talk about human resources.
Yeah.
Because we have a human resource director now.
And there's a typo, so 615 should be 614. Because 615 is
Open Space Committee.
open space,
Yeah.
and it should be police, it should be the police.
Should be the police commission.
Excellent.
Good catch.
That is a
Now that I've-
non-controversial.
Adopt that.
Great job, Commissioner,
There you go.
this one.
Now that I've done this, I can retire, right?
So 615 becomes 614?
Yeah, it was a typo. Yes.
Oh.
Thank you.
So town manager should be the personnel director for the town, but how do we incorporate this human resource director position into this conversation?
Well, we could say the town manager shall supervise the personnel director of the town, for the town.
But who does the hiring
He does.
and the direct
That
control?
position does.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes, yeah. I mean, he or she has the authority and the responsibility. They may delegate it obviously to a human resources individual. That's fine.
I don't think
So
what's happening now is inconsistent
Right.
with
No,
the
but
charter.
there has been comments that people have wanted the HR director added to the,
That's a problem.
could you say that town manager shall be the personnel director for the town and the HR director reports to the town manager?
Or is that
What if
Or is
you
that
want
somewhere
to-
else?
But does that go into the charter? Because what if they decide not to have an HR department? We should just
Yeah.
keep
Because
it
that's a new
simple.
position.
Yeah, we should
I
just
mean-
keep it simple, because they could get rid of that and come up with something else,
I mean, to the extent there's any ambiguity, I think, the Board of Selectmen could pass a resolution saying we allow them to hire an HR director. We've essentially done that through the budget, and I think that's consistent.
Can we add in just or can delegate duties to?
Unless the selectmen say they want them to stop.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure we
So,
need to change anything.
so here it says that he can't hire or fire town employee. He can hire and fire town employees except for Board of Education employees. Does he have the ability to hire and fire police officers?
No, that's excluded.
That's
at the
the
bottom.
excluded.
Exclusion.
that's a
Yeah, which now says open space.
614 and 701? It is worded a little like,
Because if it's saying you can only do it for, that he can't do it for the Board of Ed, it implies that he can do it for everybody else.
Well, it says,
Even though,
police department shall be governed by
I think it's a long sentence. I think
it's just a long
it needs to be
sentence.
chopped up a little bit.
Well,
Provided,
and
however.
that's like an overarching comment that I get from a lot of people, is this, the town charter is difficult to read.
Yeah.
So when we do this, it'd be nice to.
Oh, that's one sentence. Yeah, that's.
It's one whole sentence.
I'm just reading them. Wait, there's no period.
See, now we are used to reading one sentence in the whole paragraph, right?
Yeah.
But most
Yeah.
people are just not.
You don't wanna duplicate language in one section to another.
Yeah.
It's
I
always
had Miss Miller as an
problems.
English teacher, and this is a run-on
Reference.
No, but see, for Melissa, for Jackie and myself, it's not at all uncommon to see this. So it's normal for us. But you guys, and we need to draft it for people who don't have that kind of training. So that's another thing that we need to think about when we come to a.
It does sound very legal.
Yeah. Yeah. It should really be in much plainer English.
Thank you.
You know, think about all the people
This is a
who
legal
come in.
document though, I mean, this
Well, it is, but let's just say, like, a new member of the Board of Selectmen come in and they read this.
Yeah, they're good.
They have to read this as not a lawyer, because they're not a lawyer. They give us pizzas at our meetings.
You know, someone, you know, someone migrates from Africa, doesn't know English very well, and becomes a selectman, right? They should be able to read
It's a legal
This is
document,
the part
but
of the sentence that
That's a
confuses
big
me.
pull
Yeah.
for that one.
Okay, and it's maybe because I'm not a lawyer, okay?
See, that's what I'm
It
trying.
says shall be under the town manager's direct control, subject to the approval of the Board of Selectmen, provided, however, that the appointment and removal of officers and employees of the police department shall be governed by the provisions. Why can't it just say,
you could just put
the
a,
police department shall be governed by the
just-
provisions of section 614 and
Yeah, just put a-
707 in this
just-
charter?
just put a period after selectmen, and then however, the appointment of the
Yeah.
officers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
This provided and however
Yeah.
in with two
Well,
all these commas
Yeah.
makes it
Just take it
confusing
out.
to me.
Provided,
you can
however,
put it in
therefore.
separate sentences.
Yeah.
But, you know, the reason statutes get drafted in this bizarre way is because they want
They want
to make
confuse
it
you.
clear that these two sentences aren't in conflict, that one of them governs.
Okay.
So typically, the second sentence about the police would start with something like notwithstanding the foregoing, or which is
Right.
also very formal. But you have to make it clear that what I just said doesn't apply to the following sentence, or doesn't change it. So we've said he has that authority. Now we have to say in the second sentence, forget what I just told you if you're talking about the police.
So the provided, however, portion is really not the problem. Where the drafting is a little muddy is the Board of Selectmen component of it. That requires a little bit of cleaning up. So after the semicolon where it says approval of the Board of Selectmen, semicolon, and all advertising for hiring, etc., except Board of Education employees shall be under the town manager's direct control, subject to the approval of Board of Selectmen. So if you were to read this very quickly, all of a sudden you're going, what's this Board of Education employees? So that's the portion that needs to be done. The provided, however, I think is okay, because that's just standard language, and somebody will be able to explain that to you very easily.
How about if we said, and all advertising for hiring and dismissal of town employees shall be under the town manager's direct control, subject to the approval of the Board of Selectmen, and
Except,
with the following exceptions. And then we say Board of Education employees, and we say
The appointment.
furthermore. So, okay, so
So
For-
we're going to need a subclause
yeah,
A.
so, in other words, starting in the third line, all advertising for hiring dismissal of town employees, and then strike the comma, strike Board of Education employees, comma, shall be under the town manager's direct control, subject to the Board of, approval of Board of Selectmen.
Period.
with the exception of,
No, and then we can say
with the following.
notwithstanding.
Well, why don't we say, with the following exceptions,
colon.
right?
I don't even know if you need to reference the Board of Education employees, because by definition, they are not town employees. So you don't really need it. You need to specify them. You need to make the exemption for the
Okay.
police,
And
and
then
I don't
let's
even know if you
say-
need the Board of Ed.
Well, we could then strike provided, however, that, and just say, the appointment and removal of officers and employees of the police department shall be governed by the provision of 614.
Okay, I mean,
It's
the
point of
Board of Ed
clarification.
are not town employees?
They're Board of Ed employees.
But
They're not town employees.
But
I think colloquially, I think Commissioner Brett is saying that they are town of Simsbury employees. It's just under the class of Board of Education.
I wouldn't want a
I
resident
think
thinking
town-
that
the town
that
manager.
they don't
leave it
like
in.
a
I'm
kid's teacher
I'm
and that the board of
Fine.
selectmen could somehow fire them.
I understand your distinction. I'm saying, I think they are a town employee.
Well, so
It-
why don't we say, with the following exceptions, then we have the appointment and removal of officers and employees of the police department shall be governed by the provisions of 614 and 707, and the appointment and removal of Board of Education employees shall be governed or shall be determined by the Board of Education.
And there's something in here, right?
So the Board of
That is so much
Education,
clearer.
in the Board of Education section of the charter, it outlines who can hire and fire the
In
superintendent
fact, we
and
can
teachers.
probably
A sec-
cite to a section if
We
we're
can
gonna
cite back to that
yeah,
section.
find
Yeah.
it.
I think that would clarify for me personally.
Hey, if it clarifies it for you,
Then
it's
we're
so
good.
Then we're good, because
I think if we reference back to the Board of Education section,
Yeah, exactly.
because if we're doing that for the police,
Yeah,
we keep
I
it
think
consistent
that's
that way.
absolutely right. I just don't wanna have to find that section myself.
Franklin knows where it is.
Franklin will find
As
out.
a member of the Board of Education.
have the charter sections memorized.
806, yep. Execution of law. Section D.
You know, I don't know if we need to add the periodic reports on the condition of affairs of the town. I think we're saying enough about
Only
reports.
about their responsibilities in the budget.
Executed, yeah.
So do they
Make
not exist in
reports.
the charter?
Yeah,
because
we've got,
they're-
But that's redundant, isn't it,
Yeah.
from what we just said in the previous section?
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know if there is a reference to Board of Ed in the charter like that.
Was I looking at the wrong section?
Well, that one just says what their responsibilities are for the budget.
Oh, I'm
or
sorry,
something like
I
that.
was just looking at the
I'm not sure if there is one, if it might just exist in state statute.
State statute?
Oh, then maybe we have to, okay,
Then we have to refer to
Yeah.
that.
to the state statute then. Okay.
On this question of hiring, it's also been called to my attention that when the chair of the Board of Finance addressed this body, she also made a suggestion relating to the hiring of the finance director, and that the finance director be hired in consultation with the Board of Finance. So we might want to add a provision along those lines. I think they were in the written comments we
Yeah, I
got at
think
that
they were.
time.
I have a concern about that, honestly, because where does that stop, right? I mean, if first of all, we've gone to this form of government for a reason, right? Everything we heard 7 years ago was, we need more professionals, Our town is too big, et cetera, et cetera. You guys know the drill. So, giving the chair of the Board of Finance, or any board for that matter, it seems that we're pulling it back in the previous form's direction. And if we make that provision for the Board of Finance chair, it seems to me we would have to make the same provision for the zoning chair, or
HR director.
I understand the concern. I struggle with the recommendation.
Well, the
And where does it stop? You're making a special provision for a single board, and I think that's where I have a hard time with.
Because then zoning could say, I want
That's what I mean.
input
That's
in
exactly
who
what
the
I
town
mean.
planner is
Right,
gonna
that's
do.
exactly what I mean. It's exactly.
So when the town manager has to hire someone of that stature, don't they have to run it through the board of selectmen?
I would hope
anyway?
so. Don't get me wrong. I would
But
hope there would be
there's no-
consultation. I'm just fearful of that, specifically putting that authority in.
No, I don't,
in
I
this.
agree with you on
Yeah,
that. The
yeah.
question is, what is the balance for that?
Yeah.
For
No, I'm
all
with-
the boards,
yeah,
right? Do you
right.
want to make sure that it's done properly for all the boards?
Right.
Guys, it's already in the charter. 704A requires consultation with the Board of Finance, and 703, 2 and 3 requires consultation with Parks and Rec. Those are in the charter already.
That's what I meant to say.
So take care.
No, should we take them out then?
So if you're gonna make exceptions, you need to reference those as exceptions as well.
So I'd have to reference that section.
Can we?
So we have to reconcile this with section 704.
Right. And this can fall into the other discussion about the human resources director. I don't know if the commission thought about including either somewhere in section 704 or elsewhere, just the position of HR director.
Right.
So now, in terms of making section C here, the one we were on, 502C, which is a depressing sense of how far we've gotten. But in terms of making this clear, we can, have that parallel language at the end for all the exceptions, or we could say
Just reference section.
that it's subject to the provisions of 614, 707, 704, and whatever the Board of Education provisions. In other words,
Elsewhere described in the town charter.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a better.
Well, elsewhere, I think it's worthwhile citing them to make it easier for someone who's reading it and trying to figure out the rules, not to
As
say
long-
you've got to
yeah,
read
as
the
long as you
whole
can
charter
keep your
to
document.
do it. Right, but to
Don't
say
change it.
something like all advertising for hiring dismissal shall be under the town manager's direct control, subject to the approval of the Board of Selectmen and subject to the terms of sections 614, 707, 704, and whatever is in the Board of Ed
Statute.
State statute,
and states. Well, yeah, but I think there's something in the charter too.
To be consistent with the fact that we're citing.
Yeah.
And then just make a note that when we go back to section 704 in that discussion, we have to discuss HR director in that list. So we were on D.
sorry.
Can we clean up the language on D?
Well, we don't need to ask him to report again.
Right.
We've asked him a couple of times.
Yeah, so I think we could end it with executed.
Right. And delete the rest of that sentence.
Yeah.
I think it's a stupid question. Do we need this? Or is this assumed,
We can't assume that he's gonna execute,
Okay.
that he or she's gonna execute the law. I think that it has to be,
well, it does say, number one, ensure that all laws and ordinances governing the town are faithfully executed.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's just it seems to be said so many times.
just wanna make sure we're all following the rules.
Yeah, I think we can say it once.
We also have the next
Right,
paragraph
yeah.
is also a copy.
Yeah, and it has another paragraph.
It just, I don't know, it just seems a little,
What, we wanna make a recommendation that
actually-
D goes away?
And just point of clarification, that is the point of maybe the Charter Revision Commission as a whole too, to see that there's 2 or 3 spots where the same thing is repeated. And unfortunately, maybe rewriting it is in order. Of course, this is what the commission has to decide. I'm just saying that there's a section here that elaborates one of the duties, which is section 502A1, ensuring all the laws are faithfully executed. It's up to the commission, since you've been tasked by the Board of Selectmen, to look at this and try to make it just read as it should. And it looks like that is just an expansion on that idea. So to determine if that expansion is necessary, I'd like to see what Bob would say if all of this should be spelled out. But the point of you all convening, I think, is also to make the charter clear.
yeah.
And so if
Yeah.
you
It
feel
muddies it.
that it's mentioned 3 times and we point to all 3 times, there is an opportunity to somehow use the creative mind to see what's the best way to say this once.
Yeah.
Yeah,
In my
all of D seems redundant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
Just
redundant.
So this
it's
is too
only
big to
said-
tackle now in this meeting, but I can make a note,
Can we ask
Yeah.
Bob if D can be eliminated?
of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
or if there's some statutory requirement.
Well, the way it
Spell it
was
out
set
again.
out,
Yeah.
that makes me think maybe, but I don't know, so I think that's a good question for him, so.
If we can ask Bob a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this, it's embarrassing that I didn't recognize the language. But this is identical to the language that appears in the preceding paragraph.
Yeah.
So I think I would support cutting D out.
D is very messy, and I am of the impression that fewer words make less conflict.
I made the note.
Okay, so E regarding contracts, we're just gonna get through this in section 503 and then we're.
There might be a big
Vote on the
discussion.
I
minutes.
have a very early morning flight. So, you know.
We're going to town for selectmen.
E, on the contracts, you know, our town manager made a point during his appearance that he's limited in his ability to participate in certain legal settlements. And so we might want to address that in some way in this section, although, again, we'll need Bob's advice because there are, but I think if contracts, and so I guess this is all going to be provisional, but if we say that contracts includes legal settlements, then he would be, I think, one of the people necessary to participate in discussions without vitiating the attorney-client privilege. And, you know, as for the role of the Board of Selectmen, we'd have to deal with that. It's Chapter 4.
I think that gets really messy. I don't think you can put something like that in there that would control attorney-client privilege. If he's not a client and the town isn't the named client, just because we say he should be included in those has, I think, very little to do with what's privileged or not.
Well, that's, I mean, you're right. We're dealing with a situation where, for example, it's a zoning board is the named party, and that's not the town. And so as town manager,
This is also talking about labor contracts too, so.
yeah,
I mean, you can
No, but
sue a
what-
portion of the town, but the town's not party to the suit? That's basically what you're saying.
well, you know, there are legal entities that make up the town, and yeah, I would. It's. I had a first-year professor in law school who told me the answer to every question is it depends.
Maybe.
And also, I don't know. That's it.
Right? I mean, I think I could construct a very good argument as to why the town manager, under every existing circumstances, would be part of the control group in a case against the zoning board, because it is part of the town, because its decisions are not made independently of the town, but it would depend. It's complicated. So, yeah, I just thought this would be a place to try to address that, but I think we should get our
Maybe
town
Bob's.
council to tell us how.
Yeah, is that something that we want, that should be in the charter, that says any action upon any portion of it or committee shall be considered an action against the town?
Yeah,
I don't know
but
if that
That's
would do
not,
it,
that's
but
not
the
legal.
point
This
is-
isn't gonna control
Right.
that.
It won't control the courts.
The you know, the point would be, and I mean, he raised it, and I think it's a very good one, that as it stands now, certain litigation gets siloed to an independent commission. The Board of Selectmen doesn't have any input or say into the attempts to settle it. The town manager doesn't, and maybe we can address that problem.
Yeah, I think that's a serious problem, because the
Yeah.
town can pull other resources for a settlement, but the zoning
Exactly.
only has their narrow.
So I think someone should write some language here that fixes that.
Does that constitute a new section, or are we talking about contracts and?
Yeah, I don't know.
I
I just think this is a place to try to fix it, and I think we should force.
Well, and I think Bob had some
50%,
suggestions, because he had a very strong opinion about this when we
Yeah.
when it was brought up.
I'd be interested in knowing how that happened, because then that would give us a sense of how to fix it. So, for instance, if there's a way for one committee to get sued and then our elected representatives cannot be involved in any kind of discussion because attorney-client privilege doesn't extend to them, that's an issue. It should.
Well, I think it's especially an issue when there's potential town funds that have to be expended on the settlement.
It could be town funds, it could be somebody's individual liberties, it could be anything.
Someone getting fired.
So someone could lose their job over something like this, and we sent these people to be our elected representatives. They should be in a position to control these outcomes. And so to say, well, Board of Selectmen is not going to be allowed into this because of attorney-client privilege rules, I'd like to know what that scenario is.
So this is an Ask Bob question.
Yes.
I made a note here.
Okay.
Because what Jackie says is correct. Attorney-client privilege rules are those rules. Those rules are those rules.
Yeah, we're not changing.
And I just wanted to ask, since we are making this glossary definitions and terms, I'm identifying an opportunity. Instead of saying contracts or agreements, would the commission be favorable to saying either the word contracts or agreements, and then in the glossary, say that contracts or agreements, whatever the word means, contracts, agreements, or whatever.
Yeah, we could make a definition.
Yeah, we need to define,
Okay.
what is a contract?
Okay.
Really?
What defines a contract?
Would the commission
Is it
be more?
implied or?
Well, there's a fair amount of law defining
Right.
what is or isn't.
Well, what defines an agreement? I know there's MOUs, but what defines an agreement versus a contract is.
That's what we live for.
You're gonna be so excited in this conversation.
I was suddenly so excited. I was like, yes, okay. Where's the whiteboard? Let's talk about this. No, but that question has to be addressed because that could cause some serious inconvenience to people, especially you have people migrating into our town and suddenly find themselves on the blunt end of the instrument. The Board of Selectmen cannot intervene to fix that.
Yeah.
And they are people who you have elected.
Let's put the expert.
So the last section of the town manager.
And this may not be the on Eon contracts, but we also heard though from the town manager spoke to it and the Board of Selectmen also spoke to it, is this lack of their involvement in negotiations.
Yes,
Right.
Is this the place to address that, or is it someplace else?
Well, at the time, Bob was saying that we could address that in part by giving the Board of Selectmen express authority relating to zoning and maybe whatever other
Like other
field might
towns.
do it.
He was going to get us an example from.
Yeah, no, I wasn't thinking about I'm sorry, I'm switching gears on you. I wasn't
You mean
thinking
like
about those
contract
kinds of.
negotiations
Yes.
for unions?
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
no, that's right.
Yeah. Because that has to flow that way. They have to
Collective
be
bargaining
involved.
agreements and
Exactly.
they have to flow both ways.
Yeah.
I mean, they can't be involved in the Board of Ed.
Right. But we are involved. I mean.
No, but I mean, the
I've
Board of
been in those
Selectmen
2
are
a.m.
involved.
meetings. Those are,
Right.
Well, that's
yeah.
an excellent point.
Yeah.
That's when I thought I was going to make and forgot. But
Yeah. So I don't know if this is the right spot for it.
We say here that he can enter into contracts with the approval of the Board of Selectmen, but we don't address here the board's power to supervise the
The
negotiation.
inclusion of the Board of Selectmen.
If
You
how do
don't
you
want
know
to create a
this?
situation when you got too many people in a room, though, because that's a sure way to kill a negotiation.
True,
Right. Have a
true,
whole
but you
committee.
don't know, no, and you don't, like, we have a small subset, in that, we're in those conversations, but I guess if they're not involved, then how do you know it's a good deal, bad deal? How do you know how it compares to your surrounding towns? I mean, you're going completely on the faith of the town manager, that this is a good deal.
And again,
Yeah.
he gave the example of a negotiation
Right.
that he presents as a fait accompli, meaning
Right.
that the board does not have the opportunity
Right.
to set the priorities.
Right.
So wow,
You could
we
say that.
really need to rewrite section
That's right.
E.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
that section.
Okay.
Okay, we can do this. We have one more section to go.
Yeah, but I got a lot of notes. Go ahead.
So this is all about his appointment and term and the Board of Selectmen's ability to terminate that position. My only comment would be in C. It's the disability or temporary absence of the town manager. Like, do you have to qualify, how long is temporary, what's temporary? Is it a day because you have the flu, or is it, is it a couple weeks, is it a month, is it?
Yeah,
It says 15 days.
Section not to exceed 15 days, so maybe a temporary absence would be less than 15 days, is my interpretation.
I don't like the word disability.
Yes.
Sure, I read it completely that way though, because
How about inability?
because you could that 15 days is only in reference to the designation of an acting town manager. It's not about how long
the town manager is out.
for, right?
Yeah.
The town manager can designate that acting
Right.
if it's not exceeding.
Right,
Otherwise,
but I could be out, for example, I could be out for 6 months, I'll call it temporary, and I'll just re-up the acting town manager
For
every
15
15
days,
days,
yeah.
right, right.
Right, so what constitutes temporary?
Right, exactly.
And then disability to me implies something completely different than the inability to perform the function of a town
Right.
manager.
Yeah, so we should change disability to.
That's what it used to mean. It's pretty common language.
Used to be, but-
I know, but
Yeah.
I'm a little sensitive because I have a disability. That doesn't make me incompetent to hold
Right.
my job,
Right.
okay? So I think we need to be more inclusive in our language because times have changed and a disability that someone has does not preclude them from performing their job function.
Right.
Madam Chair, would it be in case of inability?
I think it's an inability
Inability?
to perform their
Incapacity.
job functions.
I can.
Why don't we just say in case of temporary absence? Why do we even need to go there?
Yeah.
Well, wonder if somebody is not absent and they become incompetent.
No,
Like they-
no, you're with, right, yep, I'm with you.
Going for heart surgery.
I'm just
I'm
thinking
with-
like
yeah,
a
no,
president,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
like, or who steps in when,
Yeah.
like he's under anesthesia, you
Yeah,
know?
Right.
So what does the 25th Amendment say?
Yeah, there you go.
Watch too many
I'm
movies.
with you.
unable to perform duties.
Incapacity.
Yeah,
else do you have?
I'm with you, yeah.
I have notes that we gotta look at A and B too, because I gotta figure out why I wrote all this here, though.
Okay, just one very quick
Yeah.
fix. So acting, it must have a capital A. Acting.
Acting town manager, and did that get defined?
Yes. And it's already defined here, but we should put it in there as acting town manager, as, is as designated by Board of Selectmen.
And then did we want to put it in a glossary? Is that
Yes,
what I heard?
That'll be an easy definition.
But right now it says the Board of Selectmen can appoint a temporary town manager, but if the town manager is gonna be away for 2 weeks or less, he can name.
Like his deputy or,
Yes.
yeah.
I don't
He's going on
see a
vacation.
problem with that.
Right.
No,
Yeah.
he's on vacation.
Yeah. But if it's a 3-week vacation.
And the definition would be acting town manager is as defined under section 503C. So we close that. Okay.
I think when I first read this, that's why I'm like, the term, I guess I was more like, be the terms of all administrative officers, what does that mean?
Yeah, I see, I've got this.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah.
What's this?
What is an administrative officer?
Well, administrative officers, I think, is defined
Yeah, I think it's.
later in the check.
Yeah, I
But
think
is A any different from C, which we spent so much time on?
I mean, 704 is a town officers, but not administrative officers, that's where I was a little, the section 704 are.
Administrative officers are all, that's chapter 7. So that's
It lists out
But
specific
shouldn't that be
positions.
capitalized? Because to me, that just sounds like
You should be in my class.
to have a third career now.
Yeah, it's right, 701B identifies the administrative officers.
And that's what we should say. So we should do administrative officers, make that a defined term and define it as what is under 70. Or we can see in terms of all administrative officers, the way it is as defined, as identified in section 70 something something.
This basically.
Right, but 502C says he's responsible for developing job descriptions for all administrative officers and all advertising for, hiring, dismissal of town employees. We could add administrative officers, or, such administrative officers are assigned for appointment by Chapter 7. And then, 503A is essentially redundant.
That's why I got so
right.
confused. I mean, that's why I was.
It notes majority instead of just approval of the board, which I think is implied before.
So,
It wouldn't be appointments and terms, it would just be terms.
I'm feeling a little too tired to do it, but we could beef up C and it will cover everything that's in 503A. 502C.
That's a good idea.
Is there a term for how long a town manager is hired for?
The contract.
That's 3 years.
But that's not defined by the charter, that's just what the Board of Selectmen decided?
Yes.
Okay. We probably don't want to put that in here.
If I could mention one concern though, the town manager naming his replacement even for 15 days, why would that not be the Board of Selectmen's purview? 2 weeks is half a month. I'm not saying it's a long time. It just, to not even consult with the Board of Selectmen seems a little.
The intention was
It
probably.
says the Board of Selectmen may designate an acting town manager.
Except
The
town manager.
for a temporary absence, not to exceed 15 days.
So less than 15 days.
So less than 15 days, the town manager does it, like if he's on
I would
vacation.
still want them to
It's still-
confer with the Board of Selectmen, just, it's the town manager.
Right.
It's not like
Well, it says
a lower
15 days,
position.
consistent with policies established by the Board of Selectmen. It could just say, instead of consistent, as
In consultation.
in consultation with the Board of Selectmen.
If you struck the
Consideration
last
for
sentence
professional.
though, why the 15 days?
Yeah.
If it was 1 day, I think it's a moot point. But that whole last line with the 15 days, why that's carved out, I don't understand that stick in the sand. It seems a little overly specific.
Do you remember why that was added from the last one, from 10 years ago? Come on, you don't remember.
Yes.
That'd be a Paul.
We don't remember 502C.
I know.
Yeah, right.
Well, I was just confused about the whole section. I'm like, appointments of whom? His appointment? The appointments that he's making? It got a little, I just got really muddy on it.
Yeah, it's not the best.
Yeah.
I guess I look at it from a business standpoint. If I have vice president in sales and he's gonna go on vacation, I'm gonna let him pick who's gonna cover for him. That I shouldn't be second guessing.
So that whole
all-
section was added,
Every decision.
Yeah.
according to the red line line.
It's consistent with
As a
policy.
professional manager.
You need to notify
But it's
us,
also-
yeah, absence more than 2 days.
No, but
It's not,
So the question is.
I'm saying it would be a
Wait for
board
Steve, 'cause he's
that makes the decision, not one person that says they're qualified to run the town. It's just such a lofty position.
And it does say consistent with policies established, so I think under the existing charter, you could pass a resolution putting the necessary conditions on his appointment of a successor for 2 weeks.
Okay.
Or we could spell out those conditions in the charter.
No, I'm more for the less, not
Yeah.
the more.
Yeah.
I was saying
Why
why
the
even have
15
that in
days?
there with the 15 days. Not that we
Well,
should
just
be
in
more
case, I mean,
specific.
if he's gonna be away for the weekend, do you need to convene the Board of Selectmen or a long weekend, say, or 2 days, do you need to convene the Board of Selectmen to appoint the interim town manager?
Well, what?
It's just, you could set a policy saying if these are the people who are eligible if you're gonna be absent 2 days, the policy could say these more than, you could take care of it all in the policy.
Right, and not make it in the charter.
As long as the charter language, and you could get rid of the 15 days because the policy would then prescribe, is it 15 days or is it 5 days?
So that would just be added to the code if the
Yeah,
Board of Selectmen choose to
exactly.
do that.
Or by resolution or policy. You could do it any of it, multiple ways, I think.
But we can't contradict the charter.
Right.
Right, so if we eliminate that in the
Once you've got it
charter.
in here,
That's why we should take it
that's the
out.
law.
Right, so I'm saying we
Right.
need to take it out, I think is,
So stop at accept, I mean, get rid of everything after
No, I don't think that's right. I think it would be just
that you can't.
take out for temporary absences not to exceed 15 days. And so the town manager may designate an acting town manager consistent with policies established by the Board of Selectmen.
Okay. Yeah, that's good.
So
So you're not
remove-
that tired.
I got it, remove for temporary absences not to exceed.
Yeah, actually, I'd leave in for temporary absences and just take out not to exceed 15
Yes,
days.
may designate an acting town manager for temporary absences consistent with policies established by the board.
So
Subject to
if that's
policies.
adopted, then Board of Selectmen has to come up with a whole bunch of new policies to
They-
coincide with this,
Yeah,
otherwise
we'll
you're gonna
have
be.
work after you guys are done. But,
Yeah, well,
you
it
know,
should be
it's
done
yours,
simultaneously, yeah.
yours is over us, so it's important that you have the structure.
and I know maybe semantics, but do we make acting town manager all capitalized as a defined position? See,
Yes.
you taught me.
I
Okay,
have that.
okay, just
Acting
making
town
sure.
manager as a
You're a great student.
But do we need A and B?
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at.
So I think I think that at the next meeting,
Yeah,
we can have, between now and then, we
read
can
it.
prepare language on 502C that will make 503A unnecessary. And
I'm a little
And
confused
again,
on what B is.
and actually, B, right, we were gonna incorporate section 704, or a reference to 704 into 502C.
Is that basically saying when the town manager leaves, he takes his specific staff, he can't, gets rid of his staff?
His staff terminates, and then
Terminates.
they have to be reappointed by the new.
Is that
Yes.
basically what that's trying to cover?
Yes.
Okay, I
Yes.
just wanna make sure I'm understanding that.
Yep.
Sorry to
Sure.
leave this in, but for 503C, removing that, the 15 days, which I agree with, but then it read as a whole, the whole thing doesn't make sense, because it says in case of, well, we're gonna change it
Right.
to inability or temporary absence of the town manager, that the Board of Selectmen designate it, but then we say, except the town manager can designate an acting town manager for temporary absences, which is what we just said the Board of Selectmen does. Like, the whole point of that second part of it was
Right.
because of this temporal limitation.
How
And if
about
we take that away, now it's just the Board of Selectmen
well, how about?
appoint the acting
I'm
town
sorry.
manager, but the town manager also does
Yeah.
it too, consistent
Yeah.
with their policies, and then it's just.
How about if we said, in case of incapacity or temporary absence of the town manager or vacancy in the office of town manager, the Board of Selectmen may designate an acting town manager with a capital A.
Consistent with the
Period.
policies.
And then the Board of Selectmen may also adopt policies authorizing the town manager or specifying circumstances in which the town, I can't do it.
No, what we can do, actually, no,
But
what
we can
Bert
fix
says, yeah, so it's.
We can make it work.
We can just remove the except the town manager may designate, et cetera, and go with the Board of Selectmen may designate an acting town manager consistent with policies established by the Board of Selectmen. Because then in the policy, they can say, well, if there's a temporary absence, then we can do this, if there is something, so that gives the Board of Selectmen.
But then that would contradict what we put in here, though. To make a policy that says the town manager can make appoint an acting town manager when we've just said that the Board of Selectmen has to do it.
But if there's, the Board of Selectmen can create an exception to the overall
Can-
rule, right?
Well, can you say that the Board of Selectmen
Just say,
There, it's designated, based on what the Board of Selectmen are saying, that they reserve, can you like add something like that? They can give the authority to the town manager to make the appointment?
We could throw out the whole 503C and just say the Board of Selectmen shall adopt a policy for appointing an acting town manager.
in case of inability or temporary absence.
And leave it,
Leave it in their hands.
And give all the work to Steve.
Do you like that?
That works, honestly.
That's probably not a bad idea.
Yeah.
Less words.
Yeah, and more flexibility.
See, you're also a great student.
I've applied to law school.
You guys are gonna lead the curve.
There you go. So
The grading curve.
we're gonna come back to A and B and 503. Is that, we're gonna review
Yes.
it before our next meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, as it stands, it says not to exceed 15 days, consistent with the policy. So if the policies, the BOS says you have to get approval by us, and then we'll let you do 15 days.
Yeah.
Then get what you want.
Right.
So I
If
don't
the
know.
town manager says, I would like my deputy for the next 2 weeks, sure, go ahead.
Or the town manager's gonna provide a list of potential candidates that you can pick from, or whatever you wanna do.
Yeah.
But
Give
still
them the
leaves the
flexibility.
BOS
But fewer words in the charter and
control
Because you're
that
right, what if it's
15-day
a
appointment.
week?
Okay.
Okay.
So. We're gonna approve the minutes. So we have to approve the minutes of April 15th, 2025. Does anybody have any changes or discussion?
I move that we approve.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. For the next agenda item, Plan May 20th, so it's going to be a continuation of the sections that we needed Bob to put on for town manager. The last section where we wanna combine some of the language, and then we're gonna move on to the first selectman, board of selectmen section. The 400s. Do you wanna tackle anything else?
Oh, God, I don't think we're gonna get through 400. I don't think, I think it's ambitious.
Board of Selectmen and First Selectmen?
We wanna tackle
Yes.
that.
Well, how about start with section 400?
We'll start with section 400.
I go back to section 1. I don't think we're gonna get to 400 though.
Do I have the most important motion of the evening?
I make a motion to be excused and we adjourn the meetings.
Have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody like to stay? Thank you all for your time.
For over 40 years, SCM has been the voice of our town,
bringing us together through local programming,
education, and live broadcasts.
SCM isn't just about television.
It's about empowering our community, ensuring our voices are heard during government meetings, and celebrating milestones
like our high school graduations.
But today, SCM faces a challenge.
Our funding structure is based on television subscriptions, and it's no secret people have been cutting the cord.
With a shift to internet-only subscriptions,
SCM receives less revenue,
even though all our programming is freely available online.
We need your support.
We need your support.
We need your support. We need your support.
We need your support.
Your donation can make a difference. It will ensure that SCM remains open,
Continues to educate our youth, and keeps our community informed.
Thanks to SCM, I've been honing my creative skills, helping me work towards my college degree.
SCM is crucial for keeping our community connected.
SCM isn't just here to broadcast local events. They're actually preserving Simsbury's history.
Join us in preserving Simsbury's voice.
Together we can ensure that SCM continues to thrive
For generations to come.
Visit our website
Or scan the QR code on your screen to make your donation.
Every contribution counts.
Thank you for supporting Simsbury Community Media,
Where your town,
Your schools,
and your government come together.